Hey guys, today's video is going to be a massive 3-hour breakdown of every dungeon. We're going to discuss bosses, trash, and how to approach them as a healer. I just want to take a quick minute to say thank you to Quazii for having me on his podcast. And if you guys haven't checked it out, he's an absolutely wonderful host, and he has incredible interviews with a lot of different big players in the scene. Go check it out. It's called Quazii Unplugged. I will leave a link in the description below. But before we start this video, there's one more thing I want to announce, which is the launch of the Wings Is Up merch store. You guys have been asking for this for a while, and it is finally here. I'm very excited. I worked really hard on all these different designs. We've got hoodies, pullovers, crop hoodies, bomber jackets, crop tops, t-shirts, leggings, joggers, and of course, all the accessories you could ever want. A big thank you to my amazing community for all the support for the channel recently. I'm really looking forward to focusing on content creation this season. If you guys want to check out all the new merch, visit shop.wingsisup.com or just click on the link in the comment below. I hope you guys enjoy the video.
Today we are finally getting into like the technicalities, the nitty-gritty stuff about season 1, and I will do it with just MDT, and we'll pull up the overlays. My editor will do the job, but basically we'll kind of start with the new dungeons for the War Within before we go to the returning dungeons, and I'm just gonna pick your brains from just a healer perspective, but please feel free to chime in if you think that, you know, from a tank perspective, the routing needs to be done differently and whatnot. I would love to just get your thoughts. Let's just dive right into it. So I'll do it in alphabetical order. I'll start with Ara-Kara first, and maybe I'll start with the 2 spider dungeons first. I think the first pool is kind of standard, and I won't mark out the pools, but I'll just kind of go over like the areas of the dungeon. So I think most tanks kind of just pull the entire, you know, area all the way to kind of like the first mini boss spider. And, you know, for the purpose of this discussion, the count will be accurate. It's just talking about the main mechanics. I think the first pool in general, I think in parks especially, is this idea of some people see, I don't know, Doki and Co pulling like everything, the 2 casters, including the 2 casters over here, onto the mini boss, and they think that, yeah, maybe I should do that too. And I think on Fortified, people are realizing that, yeah, that's a bit sketchy. But from a healer standpoint, do you think that's something recommended? What's your thoughts here?
I mean, that's definitely a coordinated group pull, right? There are a lot of extremely dangerous things in that pack. Mostly the issue is when you have all those mobs at once, you've got a lot of things casting, a lot of kicks that need to be done, a lot of stops that need to be done. Generally with the trilling attendants, you want to use your stops on their resonating barrage, and then you want to use your kicks on their web bolts. So, but the thing is, you definitely, if you're pulling 2 trilling attendants plus the mini boss, you already need kicks on the mini boss, and you'll need kicks on the trilling attendants. If one of those web bolts ever goes off, or like 2 of those web bolts ever go off on the same person at the same time, they will get one shot in any like higher range key. So it's definitely something that you would need heavy coordination for. In a pug, you could do it in like mid-range keys if your healer was really on top of it, because your healer would have to heal through a lot of web bolts. You'd also have to be really good about AoE stops and the horrifying shrills. So definitely a very dangerous pull. Probably wouldn't recommend it for most pug groups, but if you're feeling daring, the main things to watch out for are dispels from the poison from the engorged crawlers, kicks on the mini boss, and then stops on the resonating barrage. Those are like the 3 main things to watch out for, both as a healer and a DPS.
Right, there's another thing that I found very awkward, especially in parks, is when people pull in the crawlers, and when they're low, they kind of like explode, and essentially you have kind of like a fixate mechanic, and usually that's the tank's job to kind of deal with, you know, that fixate. From just a healer's perspective, like, do you have any advice? Because everyone will be clumped up under the mini boss and kind of just working on the mini boss, but is there a way to kind of just like do this mechanic cleanly? It seems to kind of get some people randomly in parks as well when they explode.
It's rough as a melee DPS, for sure. And especially as a melee healer. I think there's a lot of different strats that you could use, but it's dependent on your comp, right? Like if you have a monk, then you could ring out the mobs when they start to do their toxic rupture. If you have AoE stuns, you could use the AoE stops to stun them and then kite them. If you have a frost mage, you can keep them super slowed. There's a lot of different things you can do. It just depends on your comp and what you have available to UCC wise. But yeah, you definitely want to be watching out as a melee. There's a lot of stuff to look out for as a melee in this area. Range generally have a pretty decent time in this entire first area, but melee are going to have a very rough time, both from trying to position in the mini bosses, which my best advice to melee trying to position with these mini bosses is stand behind them. There are these areas behind them that are actually safe from all the frontals, and makes it pretty easy to dodge everything. But yeah, melee is just gonna have a rough time, especially on the third mini boss when you have the poison clouds dropping on your feet, and you've got the web sprays dropping pools to dodge, and you have the frontal to dodge. It's a lot. So there's no real easy one-trick solution. It's just you gotta be quick with your feet and watch for all those mechanics.
Good advice. The second mini boss, I always found it interesting that somehow, I don't know, from a tank's perspective, the AoE pulses from the second mini boss spider just seems to do a lot more damage than the other two mini boss spiders. I don't know whether I'm imagining things, but from a healer's perspective, like, do you feel any difference, or is it the same?
So each mini boss has a unique mechanic. The first mini boss has the cast. The second mini boss has Call of the Brood, which is the big AoE. And then the third mini boss has poison clouds. So that's the reason. So yeah, so Attic has the poison cloud ability. So Attic and the first mini boss both actually do 0 AoE damage. They don't do any AoE damage at all. The only AoE that they could do is their frontal, which is dodgeable. So the second mini boss is the only one that actually does a big AoE damage hit. And that's what always catches people off guard. The Call of the Brood does an immense amount of damage in a very, very short amount of time. Way more dangerous than the boss, even if it's tyrannical. So you really have to watch out. So the first Call of the Brood cast happens about 5 seconds into pulling it. So as soon as you pull that boss, you need to be ready with a defensive. And as a healer, you need to have some type of big heal prepped. If you're a Holy Paladin, you need to make sure you have Holy Power and precast Virtue. If you're, a Prevoker, you might want to prep a Stasis. There's a lot of things that you could do. Just make sure that you're ready for it, because it's going to hit very hard and very fast. The second Call of the Brood doesn't actually happen for another 30 seconds or so after that. It has a fairly long ICD. I highly suggest tracking the ICD of that. But if you're not tracking it, just remember that it's about 30 seconds apart. So make sure that you're ready for the second one. Ideally, you want to kill it before the third one, because people are going to be out of their defensives by then.
Right, and just for the viewers out there who want to track the internal cooldown of like Call of the Brood, do you use like Mires's nameplate CDs, or like do you use bigwigs? Like, okay, cool. Right, so we'll link that in the description. Obviously, this is meant to be kind of like an educational episode, so definitely the resources will be in the description. I love the call out regarding the different unique abilities of the 3 mini boss spiders. I have a second question for you, a follow-up one. So the second spider does Call of the Brood, big damage AoE wise. Is it then advisable to just do this pack alone rather than pull stuff onto the second mini boss? Yeah,
typically there are mobs that you can pull onto the second mini boss, like I think those brown ones, I forget what the name of them are. Yeah, the starved crawlers. Those ones you can, although the ambush can be dangerous. I generally wouldn't bring any of the poison ones. So the ambush is just going to leap on a random player and do damage to them. So if that happens during the AoE, it's really dangerous. In general, I probably wouldn't suggest pulling anything onto that second mini boss. You can pull stuff onto the first and third mini boss for sure, but the second one is extremely dangerous to pull things in on. And if you do that, you need to make sure your group's very on top of their defensives.
Right, lovely. And I don't think we really need to talk about the third mini boss. Like we kind of talked about the poisonous cloud. This is aerial denial. I guess you just need to position better. I have a adjacent question to the 3 mini boss spiders, and that is, from a route perspective, I know that the typical punk route is you clear the 3 platforms. I've seen some people started to pull the 4th area here over here, this area where in the punk route normally nobody pulls these, and they cut count from the area before the second boss. What's your thoughts on routing like that from a healer's perspective and an efficiency perspective?
Well, the first area trash is generally significantly easier than the second area trash. The second area trash has a lot of dangerous casts that can one-shot your group and can overlap with a slam AoE. In the first area, there are a lot of kicks and stops that you should try to get, but if they go off, it's not like gonna kill somebody probably. So it's a lot easier and less dangerous from a pug perspective to try and pull that trash and then cut some out of the harder, more dangerous area. Is it more efficient? Not really. That's why a lot of groups still try to pull more trash in the second area, because it's a bit more efficient time-wise. However, in a less coordinated environment, you're going to have an easier time probably pulling more stuff in the first area. But either area is good, to be honest. It's not a huge significant difference either way.
I love that breakdown. And you know, switching gears to the first boss, Avanok. So imagine a beginner healer coming to your channel asking like, man, I'm absolutely like just helpless on this boss. Lots of AoE damage. There's a tank buster as well. Just from a healing perspective, kind of walk us through how you think about your cooldowns on this fight and what are some of the things that you need to pay attention to.
So there's two unique AoEs. The first one is Alerting Shrill, and the second one is Gossamer Onslaught. Now, Alerting Shrill deals its AoE in a 3-second time, in just 3 seconds, whereas Gossamer Onslaught deals its AoE in 6 or 5 seconds, I think. And the ticks are much slower. So Gossamer Onslaught deals technically more damage, but it's dealt much slower over time. So it's a lot easier to heal, to like use throughput to heal through, whereas Alerting Shrill is the one that's a lot more dangerous quickly. So the idea there is that you want to have more throughput for the Gossamer Onslaught, and for Alerting Shrill, you want to try and use as many defensives as possible. It's all about damage mitigation on the Alerting Shrill, and it's all about throughput on the Gossamer Onslaught. Now you can just use, you know, throughput for both and just screw using defensives, but if you're trying to make your life easier for your healer, you want to make sure that you're using your defensives or your big raid cooldowns on the Alerting Shrill, because that's the one that's going to be the most scary and catch people the most off guard, because it does its damage so quickly.
Right, I love the distinction between like damage reduction versus like throughput kind of cooldowns. That's something that I don't think I see a lot of guides kind of calling out, so love that call out there. Other than that, I think, you know, it's just kind of space management, kill the ads. I think most people kind of know that. Let's kind of switch gears into the second part of the dungeon, which is the area before the second boss. And we talked a bit about, you know, this part might be more efficient time-wise than Spider Bit, but, you know, a lot of people have questions about essentially the Blood Guard, right? Because essentially the Blood Guard it kind of does a slam, and if I'm not wrong, it also kind of it adds into the difficulty of the entire kind of pulls. Like, what's your thoughts on chaining big pulls onto the Blood Guard? Is this a dangerous thing? Is this not advisable? What do you think about how do you chain pulls over here?
I think pulling things into the Blood Guard is fine. Pulling 2 Blood Guards at once, not fine. You want to make sure if you are pulling things into the Blood Guard that you're aware of the dangerous casts. So the big one is, I think if you look at the web mages, they're the ones that do that. Yeah. So Revolting Volley is the big one. Obviously you want as few web bolts to go off as possible, and especially you want to try and CC the web bolts, like stun them or whatever during when the slam is happening from the Blood Guard, because you don't want a web bolt and the slam to go off at the same time. But in general, not too dangerous. The only thing that will kill your group is if those Revolting Volleys go off. You've got to really be careful. Make sure you have the web mages on focus if you pull them in, and get your kicks on the Revolting Volleys, or suffer the consequences, because if it goes off, the entire group's going to get hit by a poison. That poison's going to hit really hard. It's going to tick over time. You can dispel it, so it's not the end of the world sometimes. You can use like immunes and DRs and stuff, but very dangerous if that goes off.
Great. And what's your school of thought around going left versus going right over here? Because there's 2 routing paths once you clear this area over here.
Honestly, they're the exact same type of trash mobs, and there's not really much of a difference. It's just count. Depends on how much count you want to allocate to this area and which way you're in a route. But there's like, if you look at the actual trash mobs, you can do pretty much the exact same pulls regardless of which way you go. So I think right is technically the more preferable way in most routes. However, there's really nothing wrong with going left.
Fair enough. And then we have the second boss, and you know, a lot of people, they think about this beetle to be brought onto Anoop Zek. The problem obviously is the Blood Guard has kind of like this aura that, you know, reduces the damage taken and whatnot. And the question is it more efficient to pull it onto the boss?
No.
Yeah. So as a hit, so you think that we should just nuke down the pack before the boss?
Absolutely. Kill the Blood Guard, then go boss. Do not worry about pulling that in. It's just going to be a disaster.
Fair enough. And speaking about Anoop Zek, the boss itself, from a healer's perspective, what do you kind of look out for? At least from a tank perspective, I know, like, you know, it's a lot of positioning, a lot of like just making sure the ads get kicked. But from a healer's perspective, like, what are you looking out for? Where are the damage spikes on this fight?
So there are 2 things to look out for as a healer. One is the burrow charge. So periodically he's going to burrow into the ground, and then he's going to charge at a player. That player is going to get hit very, very hard. If you're a paladin, you can bop it. If you're not a paladin, you can use an external. Or if you're, the player being targeted, which is, I think it has to be a DPS player. I don't think I've ever been targeted by it. I could be wrong about that though. Could just be RNG. Then you just want to use a defensive. So the burrow charge is very scary. It does physical damage. So plate wearers should have a much easier time with it. But yeah, that's the one like big single target hit that you need to look out for. And that's where you should be using your defensives. The other thing to look out for is the dot, the infestation. So the dot is periodically going to go on somebody, and it does a lot of single target damage over the course of 5 seconds. So as soon as that debuff goes out, make sure you're tracking it and watch for whoever has that. You're just gonna need to bomb single target heals into them.
Right, love the breakdown. So speaking after the second boss, it's really the third area now, and basically you head down this path leading to the third boss. It's kind of a short dungeon. Kind of been loving all these short dungeons, but it doesn't really mean it's easier. I feel like on the park kind of setting, a lot of people kind of mess up in this area, be it whether it's they pull the drones on the side or they get stuck in bloods and stuff like that. But before we go down into technicalities, is there a preferred path on high keys? Because I've seen people just do the W route, which is down the middle. Some people go on the side. What's your thoughts on the 3 different paths here?
Left side is the one I've seen, generally speaking, the most amount of high key players doing. So I think technically left is the best routing. However, there's not a huge difference. The big difference is there's one less of the scary mobs on the left side. I forget what they're called. Yeah, the overseers. So there's one less overseer, which the overseer is probably the least efficient count in this area. So that's why you try to go left, so you can avoid doing as many overseers as possible. The only worse count than the overseers is the giant hulking mini boss. Right. So yeah, this Snow Ruby and Holler, definitely not a great mob to pull. It's not that dangerous, not that bad, just not the most efficient for count. Right. So left side's probably your best bet. One thing I always tell healers to look out for, if you're a monk or if you're a paladin, use your freedoms and your whatever the monk ability is. I'm blanking.
Tiger's Lust?
Tiger's Lust, thank you. Yes. Use your freedom and your Tiger's Lust to not actually for the black blood. So a lot of people think that you should specifically use it for the when the mob CC you, but ideally what you want to do is use your freedom on the tank in this area on cooldown, because the tank is going to get a stacking debuff that decreases their move speed, and they have to be dodging the swirls that come down, and it can actually become impossible for them to dodge at a certain point if they have high enough stacks. So you really got to be looking out for your tank safety here with their movement impairing debuffs. The black bloods, the things, if you happen to walk into a pool, just use an AoE CC or a stun or something to get yourself out. But yeah, you should be using your movement freeing abilities on the tank.
I love the call out on the grasping slash thing, because I've died so many times as a tank to this by going left. So much so that in parks I just go down the middle now, because nobody ever like freedoms or whatever, and there's only so much like mobility stuff you have. But love that call out. I think that's a great call out. For the people who don't want to go down the risk, like they just want to play W and just go down this route in the middle, we talked a bit about the Holler being just an inefficient mob, and a lot of it is just they kind of do this unavoidable stun and whatnot. I guess it's safe to say that you would never pull the Holler with like the overseers, right? Because a stun into 2 interrupts might be tricky. Is that a fair statement?
The stun only lasts a second, I think, and the interrupts are, I think, 2.5. Oh, it's 1.6. Yeah, that's pretty fast. Yeah, that could be very dangerous. The likelihood that it overlaps at the exact same time is probably low. Generally, when I pull that, I do pull an overseer in. But you can opt to only pull one overseer. Those overseers are actually not linked. So you can just pull one at a time.
Yeah.
Which I have seen some groups doing.
Good call out. Love that tip, by the way. And then the last boss, I love to pick your brains on this because this has been kind of like griefing a lot of people in parks and whatnot. And you know, I see from the smile on your face, like you feel the same as well. You know, I don't even know where to start because there's so much to talk about this boss. I think a lot of things could go wrong. People could snag your puddles. But let's start kind of chronologically into the fight. When you pull the boss, I think the first thing you get is kind of like the poison that it puts on everyone. Just from a throughput healing perspective, before we even talk about positioning requirements, like from a throughput healing perspective, how do you prep for this fight? Because the poison waves, they come, I think, twice before every cosmic, you know, kind of suck in. But how do you think about it prepping from a cooldown perspective?
So the poisons come out frequently enough that it's not like one giant thing that you're holding cooldowns for like a minute and a half for. They come out every 20 seconds or so. So there's a lot of things that make this fight easier. One is obviously poison dispels. The more poison dispels, the easier time you're going to have. I will warn you, though, it's very dangerous if you're a shaman putting down poison cleansing totem, because you have to be aware that you have a bunch of people all with these poisons, and they all need to spread out from each other and dodge the waves that spawn when their thing gets dispelled. So generally, it's a bad idea to like insta-dispel anyone. I personally, as a healer, like to run out right before the cultivating poisons is being cast and then immediately dispel myself. That way I'm safe. I can get back into melee. I, you know, can just focus on everybody else. And, you know, I can pre-position so that I know that my waves are going to be, you know, positioned pretty well. So I think from a cooldown perspective, it's just kind of make sure that you always have at least something prepped for each poisons.
I've seen people run various comms, some range heavy, some melee heavy. Would you say that a range comm has an advantage on this fight because it's just easier to kind of spread out the waves rather than a melee kind of cluster around the boss where the waves can be kind of dicey? Any thoughts here?
To be fair, I'd say that about almost every Mythic Plus boss. There's a reason ranged DPS have such a good life. And yeah, that's definitely true on this boss. Like, obviously, if you're not, like, you know, all clumped together, it's going to be a lot easier to make sure that you both don't send your waves in a bad direction and don't, you know, accidentally clip somebody else next to you.
Right.
The other thing I will say is that when you are getting dispelled from your cultivated poisons, there is potential for that. If you're moving while you get dispelled, you can actually walk into your own wave, or when it expires. So I generally tell people, you know, go out to a certain spot and then stand there for a second. You know, if you're just letting it time out, you can wait until, you know, later on in the debuff because it lasts 8 seconds. And then just make sure you're out by the end of the debuff. But if you're getting dispelled, then just go out, sit for a second, get dispelled, and then go back in after your waves spawn. Just don't walk into your own wave. It's kind of like the second boss in what was that epic dungeon last expansion? The time waves.
Yeah.
How are we already forgetting? Dawn of the Infinite. There it is.
Dawn of the Infinite.
Yes.
Yes.
The second boss.
We are
in
already
there.
in the new expansion. Yeah.
Manifested time waves. That's it.
That's the one. So great tips on cultivated poison. Now I want to talk about cosmic singularity because I think everyone knows the mechanic. You kind of kill the tiny ant, a little bit of damage drops the blood. You want to jump in the blood and it basically roots you from getting sucked in. The problem in pucks though, I think is two things. Number one, you might run into a puddle that somehow disappears midway through cosmic because you were unlucky or you didn't track when the ant was killed. Or number two, someone snagged your spot and you're just left hanging. So any advice, like your mentality when it comes to healing, because you're paying attention to unit frames, but at the same time, you kind of need to track where you're running to. So any advice over here?
So the biggest thing to remember is that Cosmic Singularity is not actually a damage event. So there's no damage that goes out, or at least there shouldn't be. There are no waves going through the group. There's really nothing happening at all except for just do the mechanic. So I wouldn't worry too much as a healer about other people's health. If they're dying to something, it's because they're standing in a lot of bad, and there's only so much you can do to help them. My biggest tip for Cosmic Singularity for everyone really is proactiveness. Proactiveness is the key to this ability. If you wait until Cosmic Singularity is already like midway through channeling to try and leap out to, you know, or run out to a circle at the last second, you have a very high likelihood of it not working out. It's also important to remember that, in fact, the mechanic starts its very fast suck-in 1.5 seconds before the cast finishes, not when the cast finishes. And that catches a lot of people off guard. A lot of people think they have the entire time to find a pool, but you actually have up until 1.5 seconds left in the cast, and then you need to be in a pool or you're going to get sucked in. So yeah, 2 things on that. 1, be proactive. Before Cosmic Singularity goes out, you should already be looking for a pool that's not near anybody else that you can claim, and you should try and get in it as soon as possible. And then 2, make sure that you have, make sure that you are aware of like other people around you, and don't like, you know, try and rush into their pool,
right,
and steal
great
it from
call
them.
outs. Yeah, great call outs on the boss. I think that about does it for Ara-Kara. Any last thoughts before we shift to kind of city of threats?
No, I think this is a great dungeon. I think the timer is a little too lenient compared to the other dungeons at the moment. It seems like people are timing this with like 9 minutes left on the same difficulty level, where they're timing other keys with like 2 minutes left. So I think that's a little bit of a disparity. You might want to see some tuning to kind of bring it in line with the other dungeons. I would prefer to see the other dungeons nerfed, or their timers like increased versus this one decreased, but we'll see what Blizzard does.
Great insights. So on to the other spider dungeon then, since we are kind of on this new theme of like spider dungeon. So I think a lot of people actually start off the dungeon with different views on how to do the first pull. So we'll do it chronologically as well. We'd love to kind of get your thoughts. I think some people, they skip this tool and they get the buff, and then they kind of pull these with the beetle over here. But I've also seen groups kind of just pull these 2 together, and then they kind of chain the pulls, later on in the dungeon. Any thoughts on what's the best way to start a dungeon? Yeah, this is just a question, I guess, on routing.
So this is always going to come down to the same thing. In pugs, I always tell people the less coordination a pull requires, the better of a pug pull it is. So even if it's slightly less efficient, if there are less kicks to manage, less stops to manage, it's going to be a better pull. So for example, if you do that 4-pack plus the mini boss, that's going to be a much easier pull to pull off versus doing the 4-pack plus the 2-pack, because you have a bunch less tasks to worry about interrupting. You can focus your kicks on just 2 of those mobs. It's a lot easier to make sure that you get most of the stops. And so yeah, the less coordination a pull requires, the better it's going to be. Even if it requires more throughput from your healer, your job is at like 90% of the time, that's still going to translate to less throughput from the healer required, because there's less coordination required. So, you know, in pugs, you're going to miss kicks all the time. You're going to miss stops all the time. That's just going to happen. So the more that you can mitigate that by doing routes that don't require as much coordination and as many kicks, the better. So try to avoid anything where it's like, you know, 3 casters in one pull. The less casters, the better. You just want to try and mitigate that as much as you can.
Love the advice. That's very helpful. Then the second decision point is, once you get up the stairs here, and I've seen groups do different things. There's some high key groups that go off to the side, on the left or on the right. Some people just hit down the middle by clearing these packs over here. Any thoughts on why you would go down the middle versus going left and right on these 2 platforms?
It's all just how you want to manage your count and how much you want to front load your count into this first area. There are a lot of things that you can skip in the latter half of the dungeon. So trying to figure out how much count you want in this area is going to dictate whether or not you go left or right or straight down the middle. Part of it's about dodging as many like mini boss Hulker mobs as you can. Some people don't like to fight them because they're not super efficient count, which I definitely get. You also can't pull them together, right? Whereas if you do go left or right, there's a lot more variance as to how many mobs you can pull together at once. In general, though, I'd say probably in a pug setting, your best bet is to just go down the middle. And again, I would lean towards the least kicks as possible. So pulling that, if you move your mouse up to the right, yeah, that pack. That pack, do not pull that pack because it's got 2 casters, plus it's got the mini bot. It's extremely, extremely dangerous, requires a lot of coordination. And I had that wipe a pug I was in just the other day because we tried to do that and there was just no coordination on kicks and everybody just got one shot immediately. And it's like, there's only so much you can do as a healer. And even as a DPS, like even if you get your interrupt, in Pugs, it's just too much overlapping of kicks. So the less cast, the better.
We've learned that the hard way as well. I think like the wet bolts are absolutely chunking people on high keys.
Oh yeah.
So I love that call out there. And you know, there's a great advice on pulling these instead of like these. So I love that tip there. Then you kind of clear everything to the first boss, and I think the first boss was definitely something that I think a lot of pucks struggle on as well. And there's a few reasons for that. And thinking about the fight chronologically, naturally there's a tank buster, right? And the buster kind of hurts. I think certain tanks are more suited for dealing that, but that's really just a press your mitigations, plan your mitigations kind of thing. I don't think there's real advice on that. But I wanted to get your thoughts on the dispel mechanic, because the boss basically puts 2 debuffs on, you know, people in your party, right? And basically they get orbs that fire off in different directions. Is there a proper way, firstly, to kind of do the dispel where you minimize the chance of the orb, you know, running through someone? And is there an ideal spot to kind of stand into position yourself? Like, what kind of advice would you give people there?
Basically, you just always want to be standing at the edge of the circle when those debuffs are coming out, and then the 2 people with the debuffs need to spread a little bit from each other. So it's kind of like the last boss in Grim Batol, where you want to be within the circle but at the edge of the circle and loosely spread as a group. This way your healer can try and get one dispel quickly as long as there's nobody near them, and you just need to be looking out for both sets of balls, and as soon as it gets dispelled, pay attention to where those balls are going, which direction they're going, and be quick with dodging. It's not an easy it's definitely not an easy mechanic in Pugs, and you're gonna have a lot of people getting stunned, and it is gonna hurt a lot. And actually the AoE damage on this fight is extremely small, like very, very, very small. The Vociferous Indoctrination, that one, it looks like a dangerous AoE, but it's actually very, very, very minimal. The biggest thing there are 2 big things that are going to get you killed on this fight, and it's not that. So definitely don't use your defensive there. Best use of a defensive is going to be the shadows that come out in case you get hit by a ball, or even just if you have the shadow debuff, because the dot hurts pretty hard. So definitely use your defensives on the shadow debuffs, not on the Vociferous Indoctrination. And the other thing that's going to get people killed, the second highest death ratio, definitely comes from when the boss needs to be moved. So at the end of the Vociferous Indoctrination, it drops a pool on the ground that expands very quickly. The tank needs to immediately be moving the mob out, and the group needs to be moving too. You want to make sure that you know which way the boss is being kited, and you're positioning yourself on the side of the circle where you'll be kiting, and you're moving quickly with the circle. Because if you linger behind it all, that lingering influence is going to destroy you very quickly, like 1 to 2 ticks.
I love the tip, because I think from my perspective, I've learned something today, because I always felt like the AoE is the one that kind of where the healer is like kind of struggling or panicking a little. But I love the call out that, you know, it's actually the kind of the debuff and the Shadow of Doubt kind of like orbs and whatnot that really might kill you. So love that call out. I learned something new today. So that's kind of like the first boss. Other than that, I think it's really just, like you said, move along with the tank and everything is fine. We have the kind of RP event. I don't think we really need to talk about the RP event. People know all the tips and tricks about going clockwise and whatnot. But, you know, I guess a fun question, do you like RP events like that, similar to like Court of Stars? What's your thoughts on RP events like that?
I like them in theory and concept. They're fun for the first, you know, 1 or 2 times as like a casual player and a lower key level player. I think it's good. I think that unique dungeons are healthy for the game, and, you know, not every dungeon should just be the exact same. You know, make sure you get XYZ kicks and make sure you get XYZ stuns, and then, you know, kill the boss, and that's it. I do like the dungeons that have unique mechanics, and I understand what the devs are going for. However, some of these RP events are just too much. Like it's too much walking in between mobs. It's not as immersive as you want it to be. There's not as much like thought put into it. Like the Court of Stars one was kind of cool at first because you had to actually think about it. You had to be like looking for the spy and stuff. This one is just, you know, follow around a shadow, and it's not very engaging. If you're gonna make a very long RP thing where you have to be walking for a while and and there's big gaps in between trash packs, at least make it super engaging. And I think that's kind of where they fell short. I do also think that it's just too much time between packs. I understand having a bit of RP and a bit of time in between packs, but you'll go almost 45 seconds sometimes in this dungeon just running from one RP to the next. And that's just too much. You know, people are dropping their stacks that they're trying to hold. There's a lot of frustrations that come with having such long gaps between combat in M+. Not to mention just the fact that you want to be fighting things, you know, that's what M+ is about. And I get that. I also understand the desire for RP and more immersive gameplay and something deeper than just, you know, zug. But I think that they went a little too far in the RP direction with this event.
Right, I love that insights, and I would definitely ask you the same question when we do Dark Cleft Flame and we do that trolley RP mechanic as well. So I'll save that question for next season. But moving on to the boss here, you know, I think boss-wise, they kind of do interchanging abilities. I think you know, healers they have a bit of kind of a spike in damage that they need to heal on the icicles. Clever pun by Blizzard. But any thoughts on, you know, the damage output that you need to heal on this fight, be it whether it's on the icicles or the tank buster that you need to heal? How do you think about this fight from a healer's perspective?
So the last 3 bosses in this area are all extremely difficult for healers. They're definitely like some of the highest difficulty healing requirements. This is on the lower side of those 3, but it's still very intense. The key to this fight is knowing where the problems are. The biggest thing is, like you said, icicles. The icicles are extremely dangerous. They can be dispelled and dwarfed off and immuned, so you should be very proactive with that if you can do that as a DPS player. And as a healer, you want to pick the most in danger person and make sure your first global when the icicles go out is dispelling that person. You want to look out for the people that get knife throw right before and right after icicles goes out, because those are the people that are both going to be taking the dot and going to be taking the single target damage plus the bleed from the knife throw. That person's going to be in a lot of danger. Make sure you save your biggest cooldowns and your biggest offensives for the icicles cast in that phase 1. There are 2 phases to this fight. The phase 1 is the dangerous icicles one. The phase 2 is significantly less dangerous. It's a tank mechanic that needs to be group soaked. I think Rhyme Dagger is the one. That one does hurt, and you will need a small cooldown for that, but it's definitely not as painful as icicles. So that's going to be what catches the most amount of healers off guard.
All right, I love the call out regarding the knife throw overlap with icicles. I actually don't think about that from a tank perspective. All I see is just damage from icicles, but I love the call out on the knife throw. That's good stuff. Okay, so you mentioned that this is kind of like the easier of the 3 remaining bosses, and we'll get to kind of like the 2 tougher bosses. But before that, there's a bit of like routing that we'd love to kind of get your thoughts. So mobs here, they kind of dance, and you know, that's not a lot of kicks, a lot of melee mobs, a lot of tank debuff mobs. How do you feel about pulling big around this area? Anything we need to look out for?
I think the biggest thing to look out for is tank damage, actually, in this area. So this is one of the few areas where there's not a lot of coordination needed, not a lot of kicks needed. So pulling more trash in this area isn't necessarily bad from a pug perspective, although it's definitely not the most efficient count, which is why you won't see it in high keys. In most high keys, you're just going to beeline it straight for the big Hulk Nerubian mini-boss. But going to that area, all the trash before that, the biggest thing that's going to surprise you as a healer is the amount of tank damage that happens. Most of these mobs are not casters, but all of them do big tank damage. They have big tank abilities, both Brutal Jab, and Brutal Jab will actually leave a debuff that increases their damage taken as well. That cannot be cleansed by an Evoker, and it cannot be dwarfed. It can be bopped, or it can be bubble taunted, but that's pretty much it. And again, bopping your tank super dangerous unless they've got a cancel bot macro, so even that's not great. Basically, you just have to power through it, both as a tank. You might need a kite as a tank. If your stacks get too high and the mobs are not dying quick enough, you should kite, because you do not want the Brutal Jab, or is it Rigorous Jab? One of them.
Both of them have debuffs,
both of them have debuffs. Yeah, okay, that's it. So you don't want either of those to stack up too high before you start kiting, or you could just get randomly one-shot. This is a great spot for externals.
Yeah, you saved a lot of tank deaths just by your comment there, so I appreciate it. Thank you so much. And we have this Venom Shell over here. I think there's a lot of damage on the Venomous Spray. Other than, yeah, is there anything we can do other than just prepping healing cooldowns for all the Venomous Spray and popping defensives? Anything you look out for in this mob?
Well, the only other thing to realize is that the Venomous Spray, entirety of its damage event is a poison dispel. So you can just dispel it and then take no damage. So Shaman's Poison Cleansing Totem, goated for this mob. You know, any healer that has a Poison Dispel should be prioritizing one immediately as soon as the cast starts, and then start healing second. You don't want to start your healing first and then have to dispel midway through your you know, healing ramp. Make sure the very first thing you do when this cast starts, pop your defensives, dispel someone, and then start blasting healing.
Great tip. And then we finally have the area before we fight the final last two boss. I think we enter here. I think most groups nowadays, they go left. Any reason to go right? Anything to pay attention to in terms of mobs over here?
So the annoying mobs in this area, and the reason that everybody goes right, are the, I think they're called Unnaturalers.
Yeah, these ones.
Yeah, so that Void Wave. So that Void Wave has to be kicked. If it doesn't get kicked, then the you'll get knocked back, and it will generally result in deaths, because not only does it do damage, but it also knocks you back potentially into webs, or not webs, eggs, which will then hatch and make your life miserable. So make sure that you try to avoid pulling as many of these as possible. And that's why if you look at the left route, you'll see there's only 2 of them, whereas if you look at the right route, it's pretty much exclusively them. So I would generally recommend everybody go left.
Right, good call out. And I think the other remaining mobs are just like kind of, they don't really do much, like the droplets over here. But I wanted to pick your brains on, you know, the boss over here, which is, I think something that a lot of people kind of struggle on. It's kind of deceiving. People think it's easy, but it's deceiving, I think, in terms of a lot of healer mechanics. The heal absorb for one, that you need to soak the orbs. But the other one that I think also is the AoE pulse, and also the area of denial around the room just makes it really messy. So how do you approach this fight? Any tips here?
It's definitely a messy fight. You're going to need constant healing because, like you said, the absorbs, and then there's the small knockback, which does AoE damage, and then there's obviously the one big damage event of the fight, which is Dark Pulse. Every time it hits 100 energy, it's going to start Dark Pulsing, and that's going to do a shit ton of damage to your group. So that's where you're going to want to use your defensives. Everywhere else, it's going to be, you know, just raw throughput. You just have to have a lot of AoE healing consistently. If you're an immune spec, then one of the best things you can do with your immune is soak a bunch of orbs, which will stack up your healing debuff, your healing absorb very high, then pop your immune, and then soak the rest while your immune is active. You can actually soak an entire wave of those healing absorbs on your own. I know at least that's how Bubble works. I can't say exactly how the other immunes work with clearing that healing absorb, but definitely for paladins, that's a great way to use your immunity on this fight and save yourself a lot of throughput.
Great tip. I wanted to pick your brains on who else, like the non-immune classes, who should soak them. Let's say you have 0 immune classes, who should primarily soak the orbs? Because obviously the tank can soak the orb, but there's obviously the tank buster that kind of also puts like a healing damage reduction on the tank. Is there a view from a healer like who should be soaking orbs here?
So it shouldn't actually be one person. It should be even your group. It's going to be a lot easier for you to heal off, you know, 5 people with 500k worth of absorbs versus 1 person with, you know, 2.5 million healing absorb. So in general, I'd say the more you can spread them out, the better. It's going to be easier to heal off as, you know, a group. And you won't just have to like bomb single target into one person for a while and put them at extreme danger. If your tank can soak more, awesome. The more your tank can take, the better. But like you said, you want to be careful that they don't try and take too much and then are screwed when oozing smash hits.
Great advice. And then we have the last boss, which I think from a healer's perspective is probably the hardest. But wait, before we get to the last boss, these 2 mini bosses before the last boss, do you chain them together? Is that too much damage to heal from, you know, the swarm and just these 2 mini bosses? What's your thoughts about chaining them together?
So most healers want cooldowns on pull for last boss because of the danger and how difficult last boss is. Because of that, they generally don't want to waste too much on the mobs right before. Pulling them together would be very dangerous. You would have to commit a lot of defensives. Chaining them can work, but here's the way it would need to work. You need to make sure 2 Umbral Weave casts go off. The Umbral casts are about 25 to 30 seconds apart from each other. I think 20 to 25 is probably more accurate. So the first one goes off a few seconds into the fight. You know, make sure you top everyone. Then the second one goes off. Once you top people from that second Umbral Weave, then you can chain the other mob in, because the next Umbral Weave cast won't happen for another 30 seconds. You can get some decent cleave in. But as a DPS player, make sure that you are finishing off the other mini boss first, because you have to kill it before the third Umbral Weave. If an Umbral Weave goes off while you're pulling this War Shell, and you know, a Tremor Slam or a Ravenous Swarm is going off, it's probably going to be a wipe unless you commit a huge amount of cooldowns to it. And that can be very dangerous if you then have to go into the boss with nothing.
Right, and this is why your episode is the most viewed, because I love the tip of the, you know, the second Umbral Weave before you chain in the second mini boss, because I think tips like that people don't really think about. So I love that call out there. That's great.
Don't say it,
on the last boss, and you know, I suspect this might be the hardest to heal. This boss has been kind of nerfed for the first week, and yet I think on high keys it could still be challenging. A lot of damage coming in from the Umbral Weave that spawns on everyone. Then there's Tremor Slam. There's, I think, physical damage on everyone. Oh wait, I think there's nature damage as well. But and then there's a Splice Dot, and then there's a Tank Buster and the Moving Orb. So lots of things to kind of track. Yeah, I don't even know where to start. Run us through your thought process on this boss.
So basically, you want to make sure that you either have a lot of throughput or a lot of defensives for each one of these overlaps. The key to this fight are the overlaps. They come in groups. So the first overlap is going to be Umbral Weave plus Splice. The second overlap is going to be Tremor Slam plus Splice. And then you're going to have the Process of Elimination, which is the tank debuff, the tank hit. And then the fight just repeats. So it's those three major events on loop. So the first thing you want to look out for is, fortunately, they reduced the splice significantly, the duration of it, which now it does not continue to tick during and after the Umbral Weave or Tremor Slam. Instead, it ends like a second or two before that. So you actually don't have to worry about topping people immediately after the big hit. The only thing that you have to worry about as a healer is making sure that your group is as topped as possible before the hit. Then after the hit, you have a full, like, you know, 15 to 20 seconds to top the group, so you don't really have to worry about that. The key to this fight is making sure that you put all of your throughput in the few seconds during Splice, right before the Tremor Slam or the Umbral Weave, because that is where you're going to need to make sure you top your group so that they go into that big AoE hit fairly healthy. You know, for Holy Paladins, I say pop wings on pull, and then you'll get it for the first two overlaps and the third two overlaps. And then all you have to do is worry about the second two overlaps, which is where you would send stuff like Bubble Sack and Devo Aura and stuff. For non-Paladin healers, I haven't played this fight much as non-Paladin, but it would be the same concept. Either you have a big throughput cooldown, or you're making sure that you have a group AoE DR or a group shield or something for your group to help mitigate the incoming damage if you don't have a lot of throughput.
Right. Love the kind of like overview on the boss. And speaking about overview, that's pretty much the entire dungeon. Any final thoughts about City of Threats before we move on?
Not really. I think we covered everything.
Right, perfect. So let me just go to Dawnbreaker, which is the third new dungeon. So I think the route is kind of fairly standard. Let's talk about it chronologically before we talk about, you know, routing options. I think the first pull is pretty standard. Everyone just pulls these 5 together. I do know that there are some random deaths that I've noticed, but as a tank, I've not really figured out why the random deaths happen. I suspect it's kicks. But this first pack of pull here, when you first start in the dungeon, is there anything to look out for from a healer's perspective?
The big thing, two big things. One is Stygian Seed, which you need to make sure you dispel immediately. That's pretty straightforward. It's just, you know, as soon as it goes out, make sure you dispel the person. Make sure it's highlighted on your frame so you can see it quickly. The second thing is Tormenting Ray, which is just going to do single target damage. And so just watch for the people with that debuff. Nothing really too dangerous in these pulls unless a lot of casts are going off from the Shadow Mages. So for that, you just want to make sure you're sending all your kicks and stuns into the Shadow Mages and making sure that that as few of those casts go off as possible, especially if they're overlapping with a Tormenting Ray.
Right, makes sense. And the next pool naturally is the one where you get to the ship, and I want to get your thoughts on this pool over here. I think some people opt to Bloodlust this second pool, just to get it on cooldown. Is that the right play, or do you prefer the Bloodlust on the first pool? Like, what's your thoughts over here?
I think the more dangerous of the two pulls is definitely the one on the ship, so bloodlusting that makes sense. It is a little weird to bloodlust without cooldowns. However, sometimes people will hold their cooldowns for it. It just kind of depends on your group comp, what you have available, and how you want to allocate your efficiency. Would you like, slightly faster dungeon speed or more safety? It's always going to be safe. The safest option to bloodlust the ship, so that's what I'll always recommend in pugs. Just because not only is that pull dangerous on the ship, it is the same mobs technically, except with one extra mini boss. And the only thing you have to worry about with the Nightfall Commander is just getting the kick on Abyssal Howl. But what makes the boat dangerous is that a lot of the shadow mages on the sides of the boat, which you actually can't see on MDT, will randomly get in combat and just start hurling bolts at players that will deal a huge amount of damage. Now, I'm hoping Blizzard changes this and fixes it so that either those mobs cannot get in combat with us and they're just like NPCs for RP purposes, or I don't know. I think that would be the only real fix, is just making sure that we cannot get in combat with them, because that bug also results sometimes in people being permanently in combat with them, and they will shoot web bolts from that ship all the way down to you at the church. It has infinite range. And it's a very funny bug when it does happen, and the only thing that fixes it is dying. So haven't seen that bug in a week or two, actually, so they may have fixed that. But in general, you still can get in combat with those mages on the side of the ship. So be very careful. If you ever notice that people are just taking random web bolts, that probably means you pulled one of those mages, and you have to throw a lot of single target spot healing and DRs into anybody that's being targeted.
So fingers crossed none of the viewers actually face that bug. We won't talk about the side ships because I think it's all about just getting kicks. And we'll just jump straight into the boss, right? So on this boss, I think, when people first started doing it on the first week, I think there's a few things that surprised people. One of which is kind of like the Obsidian Beam. There's a tank buster that's hidden, and tanks don't mitigate and they just fall over. But I think from a healer's perspective, there's a lot going on as well. There's AoE damage, there's also heal absorbs. How do you think about this fight? And what do you think about like the positioning requirements in terms of like, making sure that we have enough, we are baiting the AoE and stuff like that?
So this fight is a big mechanics check and actually a very low HPS check, dependent on how well you do the mechanics. So this fight can either be absolute hell for your healer or extremely easy and you can just DPS the whole time. And which one it ends up being is going to be highly dependent on how good your group is at the mechanics. So the biggest thing, one, is just making sure you get, as a healer, you need to make sure you get the Dispel immediately, and then just top people's heal absorbs quickly. The heal absorbs are pretty small. You don't really have to commit much at all. The actual thing that will kill people on this fight, like you said, either one, the beam, the tank buster, you want to watch your tank. If you see that your tank is about to take an obsidian beam hit and does not have mitigation up, throw an external on them or you will die. And then the other thing is just dodging. You have to dodge the beams. And then the collapsing night is the big thing that catches people off guard. So basically it's going to put two giant pools of like dark energy surges that won't necessarily be the most visually discernible thing. But as soon as you start seeing the like little cloud swirly things, that means move from that area preemptively. Don't wait for collapsing night to actually cast, because once it casts, it immediately starts taking damage, and the damage hits very hard. If you even get ticked by it twice, you can just fall over. So even on like a mid-range key, that doesn't even have to be a high key. That collapsing night is very dangerous. So pre-move as soon as collapsing night goes out and you see those cloud swirls start to happen.
Right. I love the call-outs there. Okay, great stuff. So the boss does a bit of RP, the boss eventually dies. Then it's the big question of where to go, because essentially dragon flying, they like the concept, they brought it into this new expansion. There's the church, there's kind of like the house, and then like there's the bridge area of the inn. Do you have a specific preference after the first boss where to go first?
Every group I've done has done this area different, and honestly, none of them have felt superior to the other one. I think it's just cooldown allocation, which big pull you want to do when you have cooldowns up, where you want to start. It really doesn't matter. I've seen this area pulled 1,000 different ways. All the mobs are basically the same. You can pull it almost any way you want. The key is just making sure that, like I said, you don't pull too many high coordination things at once in a pug. And in coordinated groups, you know, make sure that you know what each one of these mobs does before you design your route. You've got the casters, which need to be interrupted. You've got the shadow elementals, which are going to do a huge pulsing AoE if they don't die in time. So you got to be careful and make sure that you don't pull too many of those at once, or too many casters into one pull. But as long as you're following those rules and never have like 3 casters up at once, you should be having a good time.
Right.
Mini boss wise, it really doesn't matter where you start though.
Right, I love the general rule set about, you know, how you kind of construct your route and what the mobs do. So let's just kind of talk a bit about it, right? So this guy does the tank buster, and essentially this guy does, I guess, just pulsing AoE damage. And then there's the op guy near the inn. And I think from a route perspective, I felt like a lot of people kind of pull bigger around the tank buster, really because it's just the tank's responsibility to survive and the rest is DPS. Thoughts on pulling big in the church with, you know, this tank buster boss, with all these like kind of ads in the room and whatnot? Is that something that, from a healer's perspective, is very dicey? What do you think about big pulls around this area?
I think this is the one area in this dungeon that you can pull big on. But keep in mind, pulling big is relative to your group. So when I say this is a good spot to pull big, I don't mean go into your pug group in a plus 12 or 10 or 8 or anything and just pull like 60 mobs at once onto the mini boss. And then Ellesmere told me to, like, make sure that you're aware of your group's coordination level and what is reasonable for that, and don't just default to pulling big because it's an easier area to pull big. Most of these dungeons don't even have a timer that's relevant, and as long as you do the dungeon clean, you're gonna time it at almost any key level right now, especially early on in the season. So definitely keep that in mind whenever anyone tells you to pull big. That's just an important caveat. But that being said, yes, the church is definitely the one spot where pulling big is the most viable in this dungeon, because the tank mini boss is so much less threatening than any of the other mini bosses.
Right. So I think the other mini boss on this little house here, like, pulses AoE damage, and basically you always pull them with the tacticians. This tactician mobs is kind of interesting. Would love to kind of get your thoughts, because I feel like, yes, they do a frontal, but there's also like this kind of well, maybe it's not the tactician. I can't remember. Like, this mobs over here, I know that if anyone accidentally butt pulls them like into these 3 mobs that you tend to pull when you land, it's kind of like a very sketchy scenario. Any advice here? Like, is it just making sure you don't ever pull these together with the boss? Like, thoughts on this setup here?
So there's actually a fairly rampant issue in M+ right now with mobs pulling, because there are a few trinkets and a few major class hero abilities that are just pulling mobs from like a mile away, and are super uncontrollable. So in this area, you've got a lot of mobs surrounding this one small spot that you're trying to fight in. And if you happen to have any one of those specs, and I don't even have a list for you, unfortunately, I wish I did, but it's a lot. And if you happen to have somebody like that in your group, they could just uncontrollably pull those mobs onto that mini boss, and it can be very dangerous. So try your best to, you know, position the mini boss as far away from those mobs as you can, and make sure that you know your own spec and the bugs that come with it as best as you can, so you can try and mitigate that. But yeah, you got to be very careful about pulling those other mobs onto these bosses.
Right, that's great advice. So zooming out a little here, and then talking about the mini boss near the inn, the one that does the orb, like, I feel like this is the one that a lot of people kind of struggle on, not only because they have to position the orb so that it doesn't point towards a wall, but also I think there's a lot of damage coming out on this fight. From a healer's perspective, kind of talk us through what we need to look out for here.
So it's actually both of the mini bosses. The AoE mini boss and this mini boss both have the exact same concept behind them, which is every one of the mini bosses has one of the same ability, which is called Abyssal Blast. Now, Abyssal Blast is going to put a big dot on one player, and that player is going to be in a lot of danger. On the tank mini boss, it's irrelevant because that's the only damage event, so you just need to watch that player and make sure they get topped. However, on the other 2 mini bosses, the big thing that you need to look out for is the player that has that Abyssal Blast when the AoE damage is coming out. So it's always the overlap that is going to get people killed. So on the Abyssal, and as a DPS player too, whenever you have the Abyssal Blast debuff, try to hold your defensive if it's not during an overlap, and use your defensive if it is during an overlap. So obviously on this mini boss, on the Death Screamer mini boss with the Dark Orb, 2 things to look out for. One is that the actual AoE from the Dark Orb does not hit until the orb crashes into something, which ideally should be far away if you're doing the mechanic correctly. You want to point it as far away from the group as possible so that it goes the furthest distance possible before colliding with anything. And if you're doing that right, the actual AoE hit from the Dark Orb shouldn't happen until, 4 seconds or so after the orb has already left the group. So watching out for the player that gets the next Abyssal Blast dot when the Dark Orb is leaving, that's the player that's going to be in extreme danger, and you need to, either have a big defensive, an external, or an immunity, and then obviously you just need AoE healing in general. But there's no other damage event outside of just the Dark Orb and the Abyssal Blast. So AoE healing the group immediately is not always the thing that you need to look out for. Most of the time, the thing that you need to look out for is the one player that has that Abyssal Blast debuff when the Dark Orb goes out. As long as the group is topped reasonably before the Dark Orb hits, you don't have to worry about topping people instantly. You just have to worry about the one player with the Abyssal Blast.
You have to call on the Abyssal Blast debuff thing. And obviously once you're done with all the mini bosses, the main boss, he kind of inherits the entire set of all these kind of abilities, right? So let's talk a bit about the main boss here, the second boss. So I think everyone is kind of figure out where to position the boss. It's essentially where the boss is kind of stationary right now, and you point the orb in the far distance. But I think what people struggle on is there's a certain overlap where there's an AoE and the orb exploding at very close intervals. How do you kind of think about this fight from a healer's perspective?
Yeah, so there's one dangerous overlap that happens in the fight. So much like almost any boss in this expansion, the big key to healing this expansion to these bosses is overlaps and knowing where the overlaps happen. So most of the dangerous healing bosses in this expansion have 2 or 3 big AoE or single target damage events, and the dangerous part of those fights happen when those abilities happen very close to each other or at the same time. And you'll see this as a recurring theme through almost every single dangerous healing boss this expansion. For this one, the 2 damage events are obviously the Dark Orb and the Shadow Decay. One thing that people don't always know about the Dark Orb too, that I have to mention, there's 2 things. One, if it goes on an evoker, the actual image of the Dark Orb is infinitely larger than it actually is. It's a very strange bug. I don't know why it only happens to evokers. But yeah, you don't have to stay, 100 yards away, because the orb is way bigger than it actually is. But the other thing that you need to look out for with the Dark Orb is when it's forming, if you happen to be standing in it when it is forming, which is why the evoker thing is so annoying. If you happen to be standing in the Dark Orb when it's forming, you will get a stacking debuff on you that will hit like an absolute truck. It's almost guaranteed death if it overlaps with any other damage event, especially because the big AoE from the Dark Orb is going to go off very soon after you get that dot. So do not stand anywhere near the orb. If you're baiting it, make sure you bait it from further away, not from melee range, or you're going to take a tick and you will probably die. But yeah, the overlap is what you want to look for when the Dark Orb happens and the Shadow Decay happens immediately after that. Now, this boss has a set timing that doesn't actually show properly on Bigwigs or DBM timers right now. Basically, the first 2 Dark Orb and Shadow Decays will be far enough apart from each other that you don't have to worry about an overlap. But the 3rd time, what's going to happen is it's going to look like Shadow Decay is going to cast, but Dark Orb is actually going to cast before Shadow Decay, so you're going to get 2 Dark Orbs in a row before you get a Shadow Decay. So it's going to go Dark Orbs, then it's going to be Terrifying Slam, then he's going to spawn ads, then he's going to cast another Dark Orb, and then that is immediately going to be followed by a Shadow Decay. So the 3rd Shadow Decay of the fight is the one where you want to send big immunities on, because that's going to be the one where you're going to have the orb going off, at the exact same time that the Shadow Decay AoE hits, and it's going to be very, very scary. Big defensives, big healing cooldowns. That's the one you're going to need to look out for the most.
Love the call out on the exact overlap that they need to look out for. I think that's what a lot of people are kind of struggling on. So I love that very specific tip there. And once you're done with this boss, I feel like the dungeon kind of eases up a little. This is definitely one of the more terrifying moments. I'd like to pick your brains on the architect, the mini boss before the final boss. I kind of feel like this boss it ramps up in difficulty, or maybe I'm just imagining things, but I feel like the spawns get way more difficult to deal with as the longer the fight goes on. Is there any tip with regards to the mini boss over here?
So it's actually not really the spawns that you need to worry about. A lot of people don't realize that the spawns themselves have about an 85% reduced damage dealt debuff to them. So they deal very, very minimal damage. Most of your group damage is like, people are going to be taking very small amount of damage from the ads that spawns. People are constantly focused on like kicks and stuns and stuff that they don't necessarily need to worry about. When the big thing that's killing groups is the Tormenting Eruption. Now, the Tormenting Eruption periodically is going to channel into 2 players. It's a giant circle AoE around those 2 players, and it deals extreme damage within 5 yards of them every second. Now, that catches people off guard because a lot of times they don't realize that they need to be pre-spread for this mechanic. Before this Tormenting Eruption starts going out, you need to make sure that you are spread out from your group, because if you take even 1 to 2 ticks standing on top of somebody else that also has it, it's just like the last boss in Grim Batol, where you are going to just get one shot, and it's going to happen very fast, and you're going to be surprised. So healers, make sure you're ready for 2 target healing on these 2 players that get hit as soon as it comes out. Make sure you have healing prepped before it comes out, and then your group mechanically needs to make sure that they are spreading out before this Tormenting Eruption happens, so that you're not stacked when it does.
Love the advice there. So then we have the final boss. I personally feel like the final boss is kind of chill from a tank perspective. I've never really thought about it from a healer's perspective. So what's your thoughts? Is this easier than the second boss, or am I just overgeneralizing here?
It's definitely the first boss is the easiest, this boss is the second easiest, and then the second boss is the hardest.
Right.
This boss can be very difficult if players don't know the mechanics. So obviously the first thing is you got to make sure you get the bombs in. There will be bombs that spawn on the back of the platform, and you need to pick them up and then bring them to the boss and use your special action button to throw them at the boss. If you do that and then your DPS aim the rolling acids correctly, you're going to have a good time. As a healer, I think it's Spinneret Strands. I don't remember. No, it's Spinneret Strands and Rolling Acid. Both need to be placed correctly and out of the group. The big thing as a healer to look out for is the acid. What's it called? Is it rolling acid? No, it's erosive spray. Yeah. So erosive spray is going to be the big AoE damage of the fight. There's going to be 2 things to look out for as a healer. 1, the Spinneret Strands are going to do big single target damage to the 2 people placing them. And then 2 is the erosive spray, which is going to do big AoE damage to the whole group. When those 2 happen close to each other, you need to really watch out for those 2 players that have the Spinneret Strands, because they can be in a lot of danger from the initial ticks of the erosive spray. Overall, though, that's pretty much it mechanically. Healers have a really nice time on this boss because they actually cannot get targeted by the Spinneret Strands or the Rolling Acid, so we barely have to do any mechanics. We basically just get to sit there and heal, which is really, really nice. But yeah, there isn't too much to worry about from a healer perspective. It's not a like very, very high intensive healing intensive fight. The second phase is definitely going to be the worst of the 2, but not by a huge margin. Again, just make sure you're watching the 2 people with Spinneret Strands, and then you have healing prepped for the erosive spray.
Right. And overall, Dawnbreaker was one of the dungeons where a lot of people said like it's very buggy and whatnot in the beta. But what's your thoughts? Any last advice, thoughts on the dungeon before we move on?
I think this dungeon is pretty well designed, actually. I like a lot of parts of Dawnbreaker. Some bugs made it very frustrating early on and are still making it a little frustrating, but hopefully those get fixed soon. And outside of that, I think it's really just going to come down to the second and third mini boss. If if Blizzard can mitigate the accidental pulling of other mobs, that would help a lot. In the second boss area, but also the third. You can also accidentally pull a lot of mobs into the third mini boss, which can be very dangerous too, which is why I often tell people to try and position not inside the courtyard, but rather a little bit further away. So yeah, I think overall though, pretty good dungeon. Some interesting unique mechanics, some interesting unique boss fights. I do think they could look at the overlaps and maybe make them a little less punishing, especially in a pug setting. But overall, I enjoy Dawnbreaker.
Cool. We're gonna switch into Stonevaults here, and we are hitting the halfway mark. And I'll kind of pick up the pace a little because Ellesmere, I know you don't have all day, so I would just kind of jump through.
It's mostly my fault. I love to yap, so I'm very sorry that you have to listen to me talk
advice,
for so long.
But I'm also just being mindful, like, you know, I don't want to take too much of your time because I know you got a busy day. So I will kind of zoom through and home in on the important bits. So naturally, I think most people do in Stonevaults, like the early pulls, they pull to the end of the hallway, they pop Bloodlust and whatnot. The only thing to really take note of is just kicking the fear mob. And, you know, I think the advice you gave earlier about, in a park, thinking about execution, not having too much kicks is important. Naturally, if you pull too much, like, you know, Void Soul mobs and you can't get kicks off, that's going to be terrible. What I wanted to pick your brains on, though, is how do you chain the final two golems in here? Because they do this kind of ground AoE, right? And there's also, like, ground, these golems on the left and the right. Like, what's your thoughts as a healer? Is it safe to kind of chain these together, like, on the side like that? Yeah, like, what's your thoughts here about chaining these two in?
The big thing here is watching for curse debuffs as a healer, especially healers that can't decurse. If you're a DPS that can decurse, please be on top of decursing. It makes a world of difference. Also, keep in mind you can stone form that curse. The curse happening at, like, if you have a curse when the ground pounds are happening, you got to be very careful because you're going to take a lot of damage. So if your curse can't be decursed, then make sure you're popping a big defensive. For the golems themselves, each one of the golems is going to do that AoE like you're talking about. The big thing when you're looking to chain those mobs is ICDs. You want to know when the ICD of the golems is up. You know, make sure that you're not pulling them so that they're going to be casting their ground pounds at the exact same time. Fortunately, those mobs have a bit of a built-in mechanic where they can't cast it at the exact same time, but you can get them pretty close together, which will be very dangerous. Make sure that as a healer, you're always aware of when the next one is coming out and how much time you have in between them. You want to commit your biggest heals, your biggest AoE group heals, to the smallest gap between these golem hits. So, for example, if you have two golems casting within 3 seconds of each other, then a 15-second break, then the third golem, you want to make sure your biggest heals happen after the first AoE hit of the first golem, so because that's going to be the most danger. So yeah, that's what a lot of people don't think about as a healer. Is it's not necessarily just about like always topping people no matter what and like just constant throughput. A lot of times it's way more important where you put your throughput rather than how much throughput you can do overall. So you know, a well-timed AoE heal can do infinitely more for your group survivability than twice that amount of healing over a longer duration or placed at the wrong spot. So all of it's just about making sure you know when the next ground pound is coming out and how much you need to commit to top your group before that ground pound happens.
Right. And, you know, moving on to the first boss, I love to get your perspective here because, you know, it's kind of a healer's fight in the sense like if the pucks are too trigger happy, it's always a healer having to clean up on the stacks of the dot. So specifically, I'm talking about kind of like the volatile spikes and breaking of the rocks. You know, I've heard different things in pucks where people say break 2 stacks. I've also seen people just send all the stacks and let the healer deal with it. From a healer main perspective, what's your thoughts on how to deal with this mechanic in this boss?
Okay, so this is actually one of my favorite mechanics that they've ever done for healers. And the reason why is because your healer can choose... obviously, this isn't always the case, and in pugs, like, you only have so much control. But ideally, in a coordinated setting, you can choose how the damage event of the encounter is dealt. And I think that that's really, really, really cool conceptually and was done really well with this boss. Basically, you have control. of the damage patterns and how you want the damage patterns to be dealt, so you can match that up with your healing profile. So, you know, healers that are great at big burst once every, you know, minute or something, or have like huge amounts of DR for the group and shields for the group, would rather only break, you know, 1 or 2 in the first 2 sets and then have the rest pop with the big AoE from the boss, because they just want to put all of the, you know, like an evoker with stasis or something, and they just have infinite healing in like a 6-second window. They can just choose to, you know, put most of that into the ending explosion and not break as many in the earlier sets, because that works best for their healing pattern. Whereas HPAL, for example, it's best for HPAL generally to break all 3 spikes in each set of beams, and just use, because our virtue timer lines up with each set of breaks, and it makes it, and then we can divine toll every single set of like before the big AoE. So this fight's super cool in that you can kind of decide how the damage will be dealt based on which healer you're playing and which healing profile you would prefer to have with whatever spec you're playing.
All right, lovely. Sounds like it all comes to the communication, and obviously in a puck setting, communication, I think, is something you want to do on this boss as well. So, great advice here on the first boss. And then, you know,
one more thing I just want to. Sorry, just one more thing. I know I yap so much. I'm so sorry. You probably have stuff to do.
This is great stuff.
So one thing I did want to mention is that the tank debuff on this fight actually gets groups killed a lot, and I just want to discuss how that works really quick. Basically, when the tank gets that debuff, when you dispel them, they're going to get a 50% DR for 6 seconds. That is huge for soaking the big seismic smash tank ability. Now, it can be confusing as to exactly when you want to dispel, so I actually made a weak aura that will highlight the frame of the tank and make a sound exactly when you are supposed to dispel that tank. And so I highly suggest that you get that weak aura. I'll make sure to send it to Quazii so you can put it in the description.
And how can people get your weak auras? Because I know, like, you have it in your site and whatnot. What's the best way they can get in touch with your weak auras and whatnot?
My full UI is part of a Wago pack, which I will link to you as well, and you can put in the description.
Perfect.
So that's my full UI. But as for this particular weak aura, you can also always just visit my Wago page, which has all the weak auras that I have publicly available on listed there. So that's an easy way to just check what weak auras I have. But there's a lot, so be prepared to scroll for a while. Yeah, I'll make sure that this weak aura gets linked to you specifically, though, for this mechanic, because I think it's very, very helpful for pug healing.
Awesome. Helping the community out here in great ways. Thank you so much in advance. And then, you know, after the first boss, there kind of is an option, like, where do you want to head down? And just a general question, I guess, like, would you prefer last for the machinist boss fight over here, or would you prefer last on, you know, Skarmory, the elemental boss? Any preference?
So if you had asked me a week ago, I would have said the machinist, absolutely. But the machinist fight actually got significantly nerfed. Their overlaps got fixed, so it's way less dangerous for pugs and for coordinated groups. I think that the best lust is now going to be on the Skarmory boss, so I would suggest sending it there. That being said, it really, you could do it either way. I mean, you could send lust on a trash pack. It really just depends on your group, where your CDs, when your CDs come up, and what key level you're doing, and what your group comp is. So, too many factors to really say you want to do it in one spot specifically.
Got it. So, since Skarmory is the harder boss, well, harder boss after the nerfs to machinist, let's kind of talk about it. So the trash before Skarmory, I think, you know, the biggest killer that I've seen in groups is like the despoilers. Like, obviously, chaining double despoilers is a very bad idea.
Don't do that.
So kind of talk us through like the thrash, right? Like, why is the despoiler dangerous? And if I had a despoiler in my group or pack, is there any other mobs that I need to pay attention to with regards to like the howlers or these speakers? Like, if I have a despoiler in my pack, anything I need to pay attention to?
So the despoiler, the big thing to look out for is the Void Outburst. The Void Outburst is the big AoE damage event. It only happens once every 30 seconds and it only lasts for 6 seconds. So make sure that you save your healing cooldowns for that. Now, the thing you need to really look out for is pulling too many howlers. Again, this is what I was talking about with a lot of interrupts. This entire area is chock full of mobs that need to be interrupted, both from the turned speakers, which cast the censoring gear, which silences players, to the howlers, which cast Piercing Wail. The Piercing Wail is definitely the biggest thing to look out for. Piercing Wail is a big AoE damage event that will hit very hard and will leave a stacking debuff. You absolutely cannot have that go off during the AoE of the Despoiler, but in general, you just don't want it to go off at all. So pulling too many of these Howlers at once is very dangerous. As for the other cast, the turn speakers, just make sure that you dispel the sensor and gear whenever if it ever goes off on someone, because they will be silenced. So dispelling them can help their survivability a lot. It doesn't actually do damage though, so if there's like big damage going out of the group, don't prioritize it. Obviously, you want to make sure that the group is top before you worry about somebody who's silenced.
So that's a great kind of advice for the general hallway. Like never pulling like double despoil is a very good advice. And the rest of these kind of mobs, I think generally is fairly self-explanatory. I'd love to get your thoughts on the Skarmourang boss. The main mechanic obviously is killing like the ads that is spawned, and if you don't kill it, it kind of amplifies the shield that you need to punch through, and that's a lot more healing and AoE damage going on the group. But with regards to punching through the ads, I've noticed that sometimes in parks people get trigger happy, you get double stacks or even triple stacks sometimes. How do high Mythic Plus players think about it? Like, is there a scenario where the two ads spawn really close to each other, you cleave them down at the same time, you pop defensives, and that's the most efficient way to do it? How do you think about it in terms of the execution?
So I think that there's a lot of different ways that you can do it, and it all depends on your DPS comp and how your damage profiles work. Every DPS comp is going to have different damage profiles, different levels of single target versus AoE, different levels of cleave, and you have to be aware of what your damage patterns are as a group and make sure that you never do anything that's going to cause multiple of these shards to break at once. You do not want 2 to break at once, but you especially do not want 3 to break at once. 2 is almost not survivable, definitely not survivable on a higher key, but in mid-range keys you can get away with 2 breaking at once. But if you have 3 break, it's pretty much guaranteed death, and I've had that happen multiple times in pugs. So you really have to be aware of yourself and your damage patterns as a DPS player, and make sure that you know how much cleave you're doing, and don't just try to pad on all the shards. You will get your group killed very quickly, especially Warlocks. I'm looking at you with Havoc. But yeah, as a healer on this fight though, the main thing that we want to look out for are the little orbs that drop buffs. Now, those buffs will give significant increased damage and healing to the player. Now, most of these orbs you want to give to a DPS player, but my rule as a healer is you always want to take 1 orb from the first set that spawn, and then 1 orb from the second set. This will make sure that you maintain your healing debuff for the entirety of the phase, or your healing buff for the entirety of the phase, which is going to give you significant increased healing power, and you'll refresh that those stacks right before the big shield phase, which is the big damage event, and you'll have 100% increased healing during that shield, which just makes you basically God. So, and nobody can die. So definitely take 1 unstable energy from the first round and take a second from the second round, and you will never have any problems healing this fight, unless your group, like I said, breaks 3 shards at once, in which case nothing you can do.
I love the call out about getting the orbs here though, because I feel like some of the healers, maybe they're really nice people, they just let the DPS kind of gobble them all up. But I love the call out, you folks heard the man, so hopefully in pucks going forward we see more kind of like people leaving orbs for healers. So that's great stuff on the boss. Then we have the other wing, which is kind of leading to the machinist. I personally don't have a lot to call out on this area. I think like there's a frontal mob, you dodge the frontal, there's these little dudes that put a tank debuff, and it's really a tank's responsibility to manage their stacks of debuffs. Any specific things you would like to call out with regards to this entire room? And obviously it's very dense too. Love to kind of get your thoughts around the thrash leading to the machinist boss.
There's only 2 things that I want to mention in this area. One is use movement freeing effects on your tank. Again, just like Ara-Kara. Freedom, Tiger's Lust and stuff, very nice for these mobs because they apply a stacking move speed slow on your tank. And if your tank ever wants to kite, they're going to have a bad time. Not super crucial. It can also actually be dispelled by any healer. So you don't just need freedom freeing effects. Although if you're playing Paladin, obviously Blessing of Freedom is preferred since it will immune future applications as well. In general, that's not too scary though. Not your first priority. First priority is just healing. And most of the time they won't really need the movement speed to dodge or kite. But if they do, definitely be on the lookout for that. The second thing is just the Forge Loaders. The Forge Loaders are the big mini boss style things in this area. They do the big frontal. Obviously, that's just a dodgeable mechanic. But the bigger thing is the Molten Mortar. The Molten Mortar will go on one player. It will deal a bunch of damage up front, and then it will deal a huge amount of ticking damage over the course of 15 seconds or so. That is the person you need to look out for. And if there's ever if you ever pull the double Forge Loader, which I recommend for most pugs, don't pull them. It's very dangerous. But if you ever do, be highly on the lookout. You want big throughput healing cooldowns, and you also want to use your externals and DRs, especially if you ever happen to get 2 of those debuffs at once. It's almost guaranteed death unless you have a major defensive. One weird thing that I will mention for Paladin players is that debuff can actually be bopped. It is a fire debuff. I don't know why it can be bopped, but bop absolutely immunes it. So use that very proactively.
Learned something new today on the Mortar. That's very cool tech on Bob. And you kind of read my mind because I was about to ask you, like, do you like route around these 2 dudes? So
yes,
it seems like you got my answer. Then we have the Machinist boss, and I think like you rightly mentioned, they nerfed the overlaps of the vents and kind of the box exploding. That was kind of unfair. After the nerfs, like, you know, other than finding the safe spot on the vents, any real tips from a healer's perspective, I guess, with regards to the kind of damage that's going through on the overlaps here?
This really is just the 2 damage events. You have the one big AoE when the speaker jumps to the middle, and then you've got the ticking AoE when the vents, exhaust vents happen. Those 2 are the only AoE abilities, so just make sure you have healing going into them. They don't overlap anymore, so you shouldn't have to worry about it. It's mainly just a positioning fight. Make sure that you're in the right spot.
Right, awesome. So, you know, after the nerfs, like I said, I think this fight is generally a lot more manageable now. And, you know, with regards to that, like, eventually you beat the boss, you transit back into the middle, and then you kind of make your way towards the final boss. And, you know, I've seen different approaches to the kind of like mobs over here leading to the final boss. And firstly, I think the Order Guards, they're kind of annoying. They do a charge, and then, you know, it's kind of hard to see. Like, the arrows are not exactly very contrasting with regards to the ground texture. But my question to you is, how big do you chain like these packs over here? Do you prefer to do them separately? What's your thoughts on the Rock Smasher, the Honor Guards, and then chaining in the Menders and stuff like that?
So I've had this pack be complete chaos so many times. Everybody pulls it the same way, and almost the same thing happens every time. People get hit by the frontals on the Honor Guards because the blue arrows are very hard to see sometimes, the Shield Stampede, and they go extremely far. And what generally wipes people when they try to do this big pull that you're talking about, the 2 mobs at the front, plus the Rock Smasher, and then the 4 mobs all at once, that's not necessarily a bad pull to do, even in a pug, because there's only 2 kick mobs, and everything else is just dodge. So it's not actually that bad as long as you get kicks and you dodge. But dodging can be very difficult when you have 4 of these. And the big thing to look out for when dodging is never ever being on the far side of the mobs. In other words, the side where you see those 3 mobs at the bottom. If you are dodging so that the frontal effect from those mobs, the Shield Stampede, is aimed anywhere near those 3 mobs, they will just charge infinitely towards the boss room and pull those mobs, and then you will wipe. And so many times I've seen people pull this 6-pack with the Rock Smasher, and then somebody baits one of the charges towards those mobs, and they just charge so far that it's totally unexpected, and then those mobs pull and you die. So be very, very, very aware of that. Always bait backwards, and always be looking for things to dodge on this pull, because it's just constant dodging. Now, do I recommend pulling it smaller? Probably for safety, it would be a good idea, but it just depends on how tight your timer is. Luckily, this is at the end of a dungeon, so you can really make like a call at the last minute, like, okay, do we actually need to pull this all together? Or can we just do 2 Shield Stampeders plus the Rock Guy, and then the 4-pack, and then the 3-pack, and just do it, you know, pack by pack slower?
I love the call on the charges. I'm reliving some nightmares in pucks. I had the same situation happen, and it's just terrible. Speaking about terrible situations, another thing that I think, you know, that has happened in pucks is these final packs here, you know, chaining them together seems like a bad idea, but I've seen people kind of either they butt pull because they are very near one another, or they just think that, you know, it's just 4 dudes and 2 big golems, how hard can it be? And I don't know, I just feel like the totems absolutely decimate people. What's your thoughts on chaining them? Is it even possible?
So a lot of the times it's not actually the totems. This follows the rule that I was talking about with pug poles and caster mobs, of my rule of never having 3 or more caster mobs in one pole unless you're in a coordinated environment. This has 4 casters, and while Stonevault only goes on the tank, so you think that it's fine, your tank is going to get absolutely destroyed by these Stonevaults. When 4 of them are just chain casting, because they spam cast this ability, and you can only kick so many. Even just having 1 person on one of the bolts, you can have 4 interrupts in your group, each one assigned to one of them, and they're still going to get like 4 casts off in between every, you know, interrupt. So it very, 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 very dangerous to pull these together, and I would not suggest it in most groups. I would suggest pulling one pack and LOSing it back to around the corner, back where those 3 mobs are. Yeah, where that pillar is exactly. I think that's generally going to be your best bet.
Right. And then we have the final boss. I think the final boss is, I think, really easy, but that's because I don't heal. I know there's a ramping dot on it. And love to get your thoughts on final boss. What do we need to pay attention to here?
There's really only one thing, which is the ramping dot that you were talking about. Basically, what most people don't realize is that dot that goes on you that you need to clear by like moving close enough to a portal. So moving within 15 yards of one of the void rifts is going to eat it, and then it will close the rift, and you will clear your debuff. Now, that is crucial because the longer this debuff sits on you, the more damage it does. And a lot of people don't even realize that this debuff ramps, and they're just like, oh, I'll just press the defensive and live until the next one, and I can worry about it later. And then they just get one shot eventually because the ticks are doing 80% of their health and it overlaps with the AoE. So the big thing to look out for, there are 2 things. One, as a player, make sure mechanically you're always clearing this dot. You're always being as proactive as possible to clear the dot. And if you know that you can't clear the dot for a little bit, pop a big defensive until you can clear it. The other thing to look out for is any time that this dot goes out during one of the unavoidable AoEs. And that is when you're going to want to send defensives or group CDs or big throughput cooldowns as a healer. You want to make sure that the overlaps, once again, it's that same thing. Anytime that 2 damage events happen close enough together, that's what you want to focus on. That's a big theme of this expansion.
Good stuff. And that kind of wraps up Stonevault. You know, maybe one way to conclude the dungeon, I think it's a lot of people have talked about the amount of like decursors needed in this dungeon. If you're forming a pug group, how important is like decursors for this entire dungeon? Extremely.
I'm really hoping that they tone down some of the decurse requirements in this dungeon and Grim Batol. They did actually nerf the Grim Batol one significantly recently, and that did wonders for pugging. I'm hoping they do something similar in here, either increase the ICD of the curses on these mobs, or just make, you know, one of the mobs in those packs not one of the decurses and just make them like a tank mob. Just because having, you know, a pull with 5 or 6 mobs that all put out decurses, it's just a lot for a healer to have to worry about, especially when the decurses do so much damage. So either tone down the amount of decurses that go out, or tone down the damage that the decurse does, so it's not so punishing when you don't have multiple decurses in your group.
I love that you kind of mentioned Grim Batol, because like that's a very nice segue. So let's just jump right into Grim Batol. Returning dungeon from Cataclysm, they obviously made some changes. Love to get your thoughts. Again, chronologically, we start off on the left over here. I've seen people do various variation of the first pool with Bloodlust. Some people go just these 4 and they just Bloodlust this. Some people pull this pack. I think some crazy people even pull the 4th pack. Thoughts on a healer's perspective? What do you recommend over here?
Don't pull
and
the 4th pack.
What do you look out for? Yeah.
Even pulling the 3rd pack can be very dangerous. I generally recommend either you do the first 3 packs together with Bloodlust, or you do this whole first area in 3 pulls, and you do the 3+1, and then the 3+3, and then the 1+4.
Right.
Those are the 2 different ways to pull this area. I do generally think that this one that you have up right now, the 3 pulls, is the safest for pugs. It's going to result in the least amount of deaths. And again, most of these dungeons don't come down to timers. So worrying about MDI pulls is probably just going to deplete your key. Whereas slow and steady wins the race is really the motto early in an expansion. With this first pull, though, regardless of which mobs you decide to pull, the big thing to look out for is kicks on the AoE. The Earthcaller does a mass tremor cast, and that is the big thing that you need to look out for kicking. Make sure that that never goes off, especially when the dragon is doing its AoE. Now, the dragon's AoE can be LOS'd, and I highly suggest that if you can LOS, that you do, both for your healer's sake and for your own sake. But if you can't LOS for any reason, just make sure you position yourself that you won't get knocked off the edge, because I've seen that happen way too many times. And also, that's a great spot for a defensive and for healing cooldowns. Just make sure that you top your group quickly after that. And otherwise, just place your Twilight Flame well, and there's not much to worry about from a healer perspective if you're getting hits on the Mass Tremor.
Right. And then we transit kind of into the RP event, and we have the bombing run, right? Is there a priority pack that you always go for when it comes to the bombing run?
Boy, I'm tired. So when you're doing the bombing run, you want to look out for if the patrol ever, that patrol ever lines up with that 4-pack with the dragon. That's the big thing that you want to try and get with your 1 button. Your 2 button, just send on CD, but your 1 button, try to look out for getting those 7 mobs together. That's the best use of it. Obviously, you don't want to overcommit, though. If they're lined up and your entire group just sends all their 1s into it, then you're going to end up with nothing to kill the other packs and lose a lot of time because you'll have way overkilled that first one. So make sure you're sending a lot of damage into that, but don't overkill it.
Right, good advice. And by the time you're done with bombing run, most of these mobs should be kind of low, and there's a lot of repeatable mobs. So I won't talk specifics here, but I would ask you, because I've seen people kind of trigger this dragon here for count. And obviously this is a fairly linear dungeon. Any thoughts on like pulling the extra dragon by just triggering and walking over the dragon over here?
It just depends on your group. The nice thing about that dragon is there are great LOS spots. If you pull the dragon onto the bridge, you can LOS, those tiny little pillars on each side of the bridge. You can LOS the dragon from any of those spots. So it's very, very easy to LOS its only mechanic, which makes it great count. But again, it just depends. If you're in a pug setting, you might have players that do not know about the LOS, who might get knocked back into the pit. So it's one of those things where it's going to be very efficient on a high key, but could potentially be very dangerous in a pug setting.
Right. Love the callouts there. Okay, cool. Then we have the first boss, and kind of like...
Don't say it, Burn.
Just delete the drawings here. We have the first boss here, which is basically Umbris. I don't think there's a lot to talk about. It's really just a mechanical fight. You run to the safe lane, you drop your puddles. There's a tank buster. But from a healer's perspective, anything you need to keep track of here?
Nope.
Yeah.
There's nothing to talk about on this fight.
Yeah,
just AoE fight when AoE damage happens. There are no overlaps. So as long as you're healing your group, you're chill.
Fair enough. And then we have the second area here. And I think these mobs, they kind of truck tanks. There's a lot of tank busters going on. There's the Molten Giant that does AoE, and there's these like flame renders that kind of put a stacking dot on a tank. How do you think about the trash in the second area here?
Most of this area is just about getting kicks and then just making sure you have an AoE heal for the Molten Giants. I think it's called, Molten Wake. That's it. Nothing else really to worry about in this area. Just kicks, stops, and AoE healing when that one big damage event happens. The biggest thing to look out for as a healer is your tank whenever the flame renders do their slash. So those guys will absolutely, it's called, Shadow Flame Slash, and it will absolutely destroy your tank. I've had way too many tanks die to that. So if you're a tank, make sure you have big mitigation for that. And if you're a healer, watch if their mitigation is down. Make sure you have an external prep for them.
Right. And how sketchy is it to kind of chain these like mobs together as a double pull?
Generally wouldn't recommend that in a pug. It can be very dangerous when you're trying to get kicks and stops on all the casters in the elemental or rock guy pull, plus the earth collar as well. You need to get kicks and stops on, and you're having to dodge the frontals, and your tank's getting hit by multiple debuffs, plus the increased fire damage taken from the Molten Giants AoE into the Flame Render slot. It's very scary. I generally wouldn't recommend it.
Right. And then obviously with the second boss, I don't think it's a very difficult boss either. I think there's a lot to discuss. Bait the frontals, there's a tank hit,
there's
and they
one
run
thing
away.
to discuss.
Okay, sure, please go ahead.
So the one thing to discuss on this boss, obviously, I'm going to say the same thing I've said 100,000 times, which is you want to look out for the overlap. So there is 2 damage events that actually matter on this fight. One is the Forged Sword / Forged Mace, which is just going to do AoE damage. Then there is the Molten Spark. Now the Molten Spark are debuffs that go out every 3 seconds. It's going to go on 3 players, and it's going to be a big debuff that hits every second for 6 seconds. That, as soon as he is done channeling his Molten Spark cast, he will immediately start doing his AoE, his Forged Sword. That's the big overlap of the fight. So anytime that those Molten Sparks start going out, that's the spot where you want to send big defensives and big AoE healing CD.
That's great advice. I never knew that from a tank perspective, so thank you. I learned something today. That's helpful. And then after the second boss, you enter what I think is the worst part in terms of the kind of like mobs, you know, that you can pull here. And there's a bit to cover, I guess. Firstly, we have the Warlocks. I think they put a kind of a curse, and it's a kind of heal absorb, and they nerfed it. They used to put out 2, I think they put out 1 now. But on top of that, you have like these lava benders that on low health, they ascend and they pulse damage. And then there's like the mobs that we already covered, the flame render that kind of does the tank buster. How do you think about chaining the groups of mobs here together? Is it dangerous to pull bait? What should we look out for?
I think the most dangerous thing is just the curse mobs. Obviously, they did get nerfed, which is definitely significant. But those curses are still very dangerous when they go out at the same time as the lava bender is doing the ascendance. Now, yeah, this guy, when he does his ascension at 50% health, it's going to do a big AoE, and then it's going to start pulsing AoE just like the fire dragon in Ruby Life Pools. Ascension is a very dangerous ability, and you need to make sure that when it goes out, that if there are any healing absorbs, you crowd target those heals immediately and make sure that you clear them. It's going to require a lot of AoE group healing, and that's the best spot that you want to send defensives on, especially if you have one of those heal absorbs and can't clear it with a decurse. So be very careful. Anytime you pull one of these lava benders, just be careful you don't pull too many warlocks with it. If you're in a coordinated enough group, you can, but just remember, for every 1 warlock that you add to a lava bender fight, you're potentially going to just have somebody die, unless you have plenty of decurses in your comp or a god tier healer.
Like yourself. Anyway, moving on. So we've talked a bit about like how to chain mobs. Obviously, you called out the very dangerous bit is the lava bender's ascension with the warlocks, kind of decurses, and if you don't have enough decurses, like lots of risk there. And it's the same over here. So we have again the patrolling lava bender alongside the warlocks and whatnot. So I won't kind of repeat and just we can kind of take the advice there. These last 2 lava benders though, you fight them at the same time. Any advice here?
Well, the best thing you can do for your healer is kill them one at a time. Obviously, you have to pull them both at the same time, but again, they don't actually start doing very dangerous mechanics group damage-wise until they hit 50% and cast their ascension. So the idea here as a DPS player is you want to single target one of them down and kill it before the second one hits 50%. Now, that doesn't always happen. The biggest thing I tell healers is make sure that you have huge healing cooldowns for this. Be prepared for the worst. Be prepared for them to phase at the exact same time. And you want to use your DRs when the ascension is going off. So if they're going to be casting at the same time, make sure that you have a DR ready for the second ascension cast. The first one, you should be okay. The second one is going to happen while the ticking damage from the first one is already still happening. That's going to be the very dangerous one. And then during the ticking phase at the very end, at some point you will get circles that will come out on you. Dark Eruption, that's going to do a huge amount of damage to you on top of the ticking damage. That's the best spot for immunities or big group cooldowns. It's going to be very, very, very dangerous, and you're likely to lose somebody if they don't have anything. So make sure you watch for that. That's my favorite spot to bubble sack or press Devo or health pot. Whatever you have to help your healer out when that Dark Eruption is about to go off. Don't do it after the Dark Eruption goes off. You want to do it before. Make sure that you don't die to the actual hit of the Dark Eruption going off.
Love the call out on Dark Eruption because I think everyone's focused on Ascension, but I love the call out on the overlap there. So that's great advice. And then we have the kind of like the third boss. This one is, I think, a step up in difficulty. I think it's a bit of coordination around the room, helping people out with ads. Anything other than like tank positioning and boss positioning and kind of using the safe spaces in the room that we need to pay attention to?
So the big problem with this boss is a lot of people still don't understand the bugs with this boss. So, and it especially last week was extremely prevalent. Basically, the way this boss works, as a healer, there's almost nothing to worry about. Clear the healing absorbs, they're not that big, and then make sure you AoE heal the Twilight Buffet when it goes out. Outside of that, the only other damage event is either if somebody runs into an ad, which is just your group dies, so nothing to worry about there except running back. 2 is the Twilight Winds, so the little tornadoes that'll be around the room, just dodging, and that's all it is, a lot of dodging, which is part of the reason it's important to have people topped as much as you can on this fight, because it is very easy to accidentally run into one of these, and they do a lot of damage, so if the player is not topped, they'll probably die to it. So in general, that just means this is a fight where you want to be proactive with your healing, make sure people are topped as fast as possible. Don't really focus on like passive healing and damage as much unless the group is fully topped. The big thing to look out for mechanically in this fight is the ad fixates. Now, what most people don't realize is that if you disorient those ads in any way, or if you use an immunity on yourself and you are fixated, those ads will refixate, and often to the closest player to them, which means if there's a melee DPS hitting them, they will instantly pop and it will one-shot your entire group. So last week, when the affix was the one that you had to use AoE disrupts on, people would, the affix would spawn, people would use a blinding light or, you know, blinding sleet or whatever they had, some sort of AoE disorient, and it would clear the affix, but it would immediately refixate one of the ads, and that ad would pop, and boom, the entire group died. So be very, very aware that immunities on that fight, if you're fixated, are banned, and using any type of blinding, disorients, anything like that, super banned if ads are up and you're gonna hit one.
You just saved a lot of keys for being bricked by that tip over there, because I actually did not know that. So that's something I learned as well. So thank you for that.
There's only one other thing. If you have a single target stun, very useful for this fight if it's long. Ideally, you don't want it to be like a 1 second AoE stun. AoE stuns also sometimes will refixate, but things like Hodge, I've have saved a lot of players. I've been able to save a lot of pugs using Hodge at the right time. You always want to Hodge them right before the knockback goes out, because when people are getting knocked is the most likely time for them to accidentally walk into their ad or accidentally get knocked into it. So if you can stop their ad from moving for like 4 or 5 seconds when that knockback is coming out, it's very, very, very helpful for pugs.
There's a great tip on that timing of the stop there. And then we have kind of like the final pulls before, I guess, the last boss, which I'm sure we'll talk about. These mobs, nothing new. We talked about it. The dragon, we already know. We can skip it around the corner if people like. They just hug the walls. I love to talk about these mobs here because, you know, it's kind of terrifying. I think they've been nerfed a little. Let's just talk about this pool here, because they're the exact same mobs, right? You have 2 corruptors, you have the tiny ads that blow up, it puts shadow, amplified damage, debuffs on people. How do you think about this pool from a healer's perspective?
So basically, each this is what people don't necessarily know about these mobs, is that what makes these mobs dangerous is not their corrupt cast itself. It is the small ads dying that give the stacking debuff Shadow Wound that increases your shadow damage taken, which then makes the corrupt hit twice as hard, 3 times as hard. Very, very, very scary. So if you're getting a corrupt cast on you and none of the ads are dead, you probably don't need a defensive or anything. You can just get single target healed through it and you'll be fine. You want to make sure that you have big defensives for when you have that debuff right after the ads die and a corrupt is going off on you. So make sure that you're aware of the smallies' health and exactly when they're going to die, and make sure that you know when you're being casted on if you have that debuff or not. So you want to make sure you're tracking it. And if you do, this last pull, because it has twice the amount of smallies and 2 of the corruptors, this is where you want immunities, this is where you want big healing cooldowns. Very dangerous.
Right, that's great advice. And then we have like the last boss, which I think is a kind of the breaker of keys over here in this dungeon. So there's a lot to go to talk about on this fight. Let's start chronologically before the ads spawn and whatnot. So he does Shadow Gale, there's like damage that you need to heal, and then you kind of congregate on this tiny circle where it pulses damage and there's swirlies around people. Any advice in terms of like that damage overlap when you're just doing that first Shadow Gale?
So in general, the Shadow Gale is not that dangerous. The dangerous part of this fight is the small circle debuffs. Now, Shadow Gale is just a generic AoE. What can make the Shadow Gale dangerous is if the smallies, the little smally ads that spawn, they put that same debuff out from the trash. And if they die before the Shadow Gale finishes, everybody is taking significantly increased damage from the Shadow Gale. So normally that won't be the case, but if your group is full of like Zug melee that just go apeshit the second they see any mob enter their field of vision, then you may have a problem. I'm looking at you, warriors. Because the ads can just get absolutely destroyed in a second, and then all of a sudden that Void Surge is going to hit, or Shadow Gale is going to hit very, very hard.
Right.
The big thing to look out for, there's 3 big things to look out for on this fight as a healer. Shadow Gale, just make sure you have your healing prepped for it. It's not actually that big of a deal. It's just a generic AoE, and it doesn't hit super hard relative to other AoEs in Mythic Plus right now. So I'd say as long as you have some healing prepped for it, you're good to go. The first big thing to look out for is of the fight is the circle closing, and then the mini circles that players get that they have to be spread out for. So I talked about this similar to Dawnbreaker on the boat, where you want to be loosely spread but within the circle. Basically on this boss, when he makes the super small circle, you want to make sure that you're spread out as soon as the circle closes. And healers, you want to make sure that you have a lot of healing prepped, because as soon as those debuffs go out, if anybody is stacked on another player, they're going to get absolutely trucked. So this is generally the best spot to use defensives, because unless your group is like incredible at spreading out, because a lot of times there will be overlap for the first second or two, and it makes it very dangerous. The second thing to look out for is actually a tank debuff called Crush. Now, Crush it just seems like, you know, your regular tank ability, but it actually hits extremely hard and can catch tanks very off guard. And I've had a few keys depleted because tanks were not ready for this. So you want to make sure you're always watching their active mitigation when Crush comes out. Now, Crush only comes out right after that phase ends. So basically that phase is going to end, the little tiny circle, the circle's going to go away, the room's going to be clear again for a second. You're going to have a few seconds, and then the boss is going to crush. Always be watching out for your tank's health. If they're not topped, you probably want an external on them unless they have a very large amount of DR from a big defensive cooldown. And then the last thing to look out for is actually the ad spawns. Now, that seems like nothing, because obviously ad spawn, it should be fine. Tank just picks them up. They don't do much damage. Easy peasy. The reality is that getting threat on all these tiny little mobs coming in from every direction is incredibly hard. And almost every single time that these spawn, DPS are going to be getting meleeed. And a lot of times they'll continue to get meleeed for a few seconds. So I found that using Bop here is really effective, making sure that you're positioning as a healer, because you're going to get healer threat immediately. As a healer, you want to be positioned as far away from those ad spawns as possible, on the opposite side of the boss from the tank, so that your tank has time to pick them up before they can run through to you. So yeah, just all things to look out for on this fight. There's a lot of little small things that are going to make a huge difference in your consistency with group survivability.
Yeah, so great advice. I think like the tip that you gave at the end there, where the ads kind of aggro onto random people, because the tank is just flying from the crush, right? And he needs time to get back into position. So I've seen a lot of devs on their bit as well. So I love the call out. I'd like to ask you though, once the tank has threat on all the ads, when's the best time to blow up the ads? It's after the AoE, but is there like a specific time where you blow up the ads?
No, it's just any time after the AoE.
Basically,
like, you shouldn't have to worry about AoEing the ads too much. They should just die passively at a relatively good time. They don't have a ton of health. But yeah, the most ideal time for them to die would be right after the AoE hits, because as soon as the AoE is done, you're going to have about 15 seconds or so before the debuffs in the small circle hit. And you want to make sure that the debuffs from the ads are gone before that happens, or you're going to have an amplified damage event, and that's going to be very scary.
Cool. That's pretty much Grim Batol. Any last thoughts? Any things that we didn't cover?
Screw this dungeon. Let's go to the next one.
Fair enough. Let's do something more lighthearted. I think.
Yes, please.
Well, I think it's lighthearted. I kind of like Mist. I know some people don't like it, but
I love
me
Mist.
It's like, yeah, same. I think it's the aesthetics that I like. But
Same.
you know, let's talk through about where are some of the more difficult pulls. I think the first pull, you know, people have done this in Shadowlands, but the first pull is basically you have all these like tiny spike claws. that you basically pull onto. Actually, it's kind of hard to read this
Burn.
thing, but I think
You
it's
gotta
something
stop.
like that. Basically, it's these spike claws, right? When you open the gate here, these spike claws, they normally chain it into this pool where you have the harvester, 2 soul cleavers, and the big villager. And this pool I know is notorious for like pucks blowing bloodlust and people just dying like randomly out of the blue. What's your thoughts on the combination of mobs here? What do people die to?
So there are 2 big things to watch out for here. The first thing are the smallies will do a leap, and they will, it's called bloodletting. They'll leave a nasty physical bleed on you. This can be bopped, it can be cleansed by an evoker, but it can also actually just be entirely avoided. So ideally what you want is for all of your group to be stacked in melee. If your ranged are also in melee and everybody in your group is in melee, these smallies will actually not jump at all, and you will mitigate all the damage and danger of this pull by doing that. So I highly suggest that if you are a ranged DPS that you know about this and make sure that you play this pull in melee. The second thing to look out for is the tank debuffs. So the tanks, I think they're called the Soul Cleavers. Yes.
Soul Split, yeah.
Soul Split is the name of the debuff. Basically, what's going to happen is every so often, the tank is going to get hit by this Soul Split, which does a lot of damage up front, but also leaves a 20% damage taken increase in this stacks. So what you want to look out for is making sure that the Soul Cleavers are synced, and then instantly dispelling the tank when they get 2 stacks. Sometimes they'll be a little desynced. In that case, generally you just want to wait for the second stack to apply and then dispel them. Very, very important that you get this dispel. So highlight it on your frames. Make sure you watch for it. Or else your tank will probably end up just getting randomly one-shot. Then the last thing to look out for is just kicks and stops on the Soul Harvester, and making sure that you single target heal the person that's targeted by the mini boss's big damage. It's called Overgrowth. But yeah, in general, this pull shouldn't be too scary unless people are getting a lot of stacks of bloodletting because they're standing out. If that happens, throw an external on the player, use bop, use something for them, help them out in some way, and then, you know, slash say and beg them to get into melee.
Love the tip on bloodletting. I didn't know that either, so love the tip there. So, you know, most people kind of like, I think the rest of the pulls are kind of standard. People kind of skip this pack usually. We won't go through the skips. I think people know it from Shadowlands. On high keys, the Dawnbreaker, I know like in most general packs, this isn't an issue, but Furious Thrashing on the very high keys, I think is a problem. Like, how do you think about this? Is there a tech around this?
It's not really tech. You can do it one of 2 ways. Either one, you can stagger them so that there's enough time in between for the healer to, you know, pull up some resources and then have a big burst for both of them. Or you can do them at the same time and use DRs. Now, you used to also outrange these. I don't know if that's still going to be the play in the highest key levels. But you used to just run more than 50 yards away and you could outrange them. I think they increased that to 100 at some point, but don't quote me on that.
Right.
So yeah, you'll generally see groups doing one or the other. Either they're going to push them at the same time and use heavy DRs like immunities or very high DRs in order to basically mitigate all the damage that's incoming during them. Or you're going to, you know, spread them out enough that your healer has time to, you know, build up some resources. So make sure you're doing that either one way or the other. They queue their Furious Thrashing at 50% health. So
good calls.
That's how you can control it.
Then we have the first boss, and I know it's kind of scary on like high tyrannical, really, because, you know, there's just a lot of stuff going on this boss. And I think most people know the general strategy. You kind of like want to burn down the tree guy, and then like the main boss takes amplified damage and whatnot.
I hate you, Burn.
From a healer's perspective, what do people die to other than Spirit Bolts going off? Like, what do we kind of need to pay attention to here?
It's mainly Spirit Bolts going off, to be honest. The only other thing I guess would be watching for... It's a pretty straightforward fight healing wise, you know? If a Spirit Bolt... The big thing you need to look out for is when there's a Fear going off at the same time as Death Shroud and a Spirit Bolt is going off. So if all those are happening at once... So Death Shroud is just the pulsing AoE that happens after a certain amount of time in the fight before you trigger the intermission phase. Obviously, that's just AoE healing, but you can get feared during that. That's where you want to use healing cooldowns. That's where you want to use defensives, stuff like that. That's definitely going to be the dangerous part of the fight is anytime you get feared during Death Shroud. And especially the danger gets amplified by the fact that Spirit Bolt can go off during that. And if it does, someone's probably going to die unless they have a big defensive or external. So be very, very careful of that.
I have another question for you. So, like, Tears of the Forest basically is an area of denial thing, right? And the question I have here is, like, is there a way where you guys think about baiting the puddles on high keys? Like, how do you deal with the fact that the space is going to be covered up and then there's the fear going off? Like, how do you think about space denial here?
Ideally, you want to move as a group in clumps and not just be, like, super spread out, right? If everybody is super spread out, the tiers are going to spread out all over the place and you're going to have a really hard time dodging. But if your group generally moves together, now I'm not saying you have to be like pixel stacked, but just generally be in the same like quadrant, and the boss shouldn't be too tough.
Right. Okay. Good stuff. So that's the first boss, and I love to talk about the maze because obviously they've changed the mobs on Shadowlands, and there's a few things to kind of like to talk about, and a few things are really terrorizing people. And I think we have different perspective because obviously what terrorizes the tanks are really the double guardian mobs, and I see if I can find them. They basically put this tank buster on the mobs on the tank here that it's kind of what's chunking people. This guardian. So the anima slash is what's killing tanks. And other than massively healing the tanks, I don't think there's a lot to talk about. The tank needs to mitigate this. And I would like to get your thoughts on just the mobs in general here. I feel like there's a lot of causes of death. But yeah, please go on. Sorry, I don't even know where to start.
Oh no, you're good. To be honest, the big problem, like, I know you said we had different perspectives, but we actually have pretty much the same perspective because those guardians are what wipes most groups. Those guardians, that anima slash is so incredibly dangerous for tanks. I had to go, I did a 12 miss pug earlier this week, and I literally went full tank healing build. I went lightsmith, I went as much tank healing as possible, and the tank legitimately could not live those anima slashes. It did so much damage. So first off, Blizzard, please just nerf them. They're outrageous right now. They do way too much damage. But second off, as a healer, that is the main thing to worry about in these pulls. There's really not much damage going out on the group. The only time there's damage going out on the group that's dangerous in any of these packs are if casts go off that shouldn't go off. And there's only one cast that really does that, which is I think it's the Shaper. Yeah, the Bramblethorn coat. So as long as you get kicks on that Bramblethorn coat, there's really not much to worry about healer. You just need kicks on that, and then you need to dispel the anima injection from the bird. Those two things, if you're doing that, there should be very, very little to heal outside of the Stalker debuffs. Now, the Stalker debuffs, this is the one thing that healers actually need to like really look out for in this area. These are basically going to go on players. They can be dwarfed, they can be cauterized, and they can be immune. So make sure you're proactive with your usage of those abilities. Misfail Bite is gonna do a lot of damage. It's a big ticking physical dot that cannot be mitigated by armor because armor doesn't affect bleeds. So everybody's gonna take a lot of damage from this. Make sure you have a big defensive and a lot of cooldowns. And the big thing is when that lines up with an Expel. Now, Expel's the other new ability in this area, aside from Anima. So yeah, that's it. Expel is going to charge at a random ranged player, and it's going to do a fair amount of damage to them. You make sure you're topping people in between the Expels, and if a debuff ever is on a ranged, that player needs a lot of help because they're probably going to get an Expel while they have the cat debuff. Expel by itself should be fine, but Expel plus cat debuff is going to be death unless they have a big defensive. So make sure you're watching for that.
Right, good callouts. So that's kind of like the maze. I don't think we need to talk about the mini boss, or do you think we need to talk about the mini boss? Like,
there's nothing to talk about.
Fairly simple. We have Miss Caller, and I think people know the mechanics. They solve the puzzle. Obviously guessing game is the toughest bit for a healer. Anything we'd like to cover here for Miss Caller?
Just dodge.
Yeah,
watch out for the dodgeball in certain areas on the floor. It can be invisible. So yeah, be extra careful of that. Use your CCs on the freeze tag cat when it spawns if you can, and make sure that you have healing prepped going into the guessing game phases. That's pretty much it. It's a pretty straightforward boss.
Fair enough. I love to talk about the slugs over here. I think they're kind of deceiving because obviously the stack on this one is a dangerous mob, especially when you pair it with maybe certain pulls like the patrol. How do you think about what's the best way to chain all these mobs together for an efficient pull?
The less of the flying dudes, the better. basically. A lot of these pulls can be done very large if you don't have the flying guys. As soon as you add the flying guys in, everything becomes a lot more difficult. You have debuffs that you need to worry about cleansing. You've got overlaps with the AoE and you know, damage events happening. In general, basically all these pulls come down to is management of that big staghorn. If you can make sure that you're getting kicks on it and you are prepped healing wise for each acid nova that goes out, so you're topping your group both before and after the acid nova hits, everything else should be cake. It should be very easy to do these pulls. The rest of it is just dodge stuff on the ground, and they have made dodging a lot easier with improved visuals, which I wish they would do for last boss as well, but at least for now the trash is visible.
Right, they're getting there. They're getting there.
Yeah.
And then we have the last boss. And Tredova has kind of changed a bit from Shadowlands too. You know, I can't really think of like ways that is, well, it all comes out to just mechanical execution, right? Dodging the acid puddles and making sure you don't run too far and stuff like that. But from a healer's perspective, I think consumption is kind of scary from the keys I've been in. How do you think about this fight?
I don't like this fight at all. I'll be honest. I think they made it a lot worse. It's very annoying. I don't know. There's really not much to love about this fight. And the main gripe I have with it actually is that the visuals are still bugged. It's been 6 years or more, and I still cannot see half of the pools that are on the ground. Yeah. And it's just killing random people. And it's driving me absolutely insane. And it drove me insane in Shadowlands, and it's going to drive me insane again this season unless they do something about it. I beg Blizzard, please work on the visuals in this dungeon. The dodge balls need to be visible on the second boss, and the ground effects need to be visible on this last boss. Either that or just remove those mechanics entirely. But the bullshit of them being like mechanics that you have to dodge and not being able to see them is very, 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 very frustrating and will lead to the most amount of deaths out of anything else in this dungeon. So that's more just a beg to Blizzard, not really something that we can play around outside of just try to realize if there is invisible acid on the ground and avoid that area entirely if you know that there is. But yeah, very, very frustrating bugs make this fight much harder than it actually should be. And I think
speaking for the people here, yeah. So I hope Blizzard listens to you before something like a big tragedy happens on like MDIs or TGP due to this bug.
Same.
Because it's atrocious. I agree. Okay, cool. So that's kind of missed. And we've done Grim Batol, which is like, I would say, one bad dungeon, one good dungeon. So if we follow the pattern, it's like Siege of Boralus as the next kind of dungeon. And this is like, you know, when we saw this dungeon returning for the War Within, I think everyone wasn't, you know, particularly happy. This gave a lot of people nightmares in BFA. But let's kind of talk about it in sequence. So we start off at the start. I think most groups have kind of aligned to basically pulling the front groups here, and they basically pop Bloodlust and whatnot. Anything to really call out on all these mobs here in this front pull?
I'm just going to take a brief moment to say I love Blizzard. I love WoW. I love M+. But bringing this dungeon back was an absolutely terrible decision.
I agree.
They have done nothing but make it worse. Like, this dungeon is miserable from start to finish, mechanically incredibly frustrating. Lots of awful, awful mechanics in here that just feel terrible to outplay as a healer, as a DPS, as a tank. Just an unfun dungeon from start to finish, and it's really a shame that they brought it back. I hate saying that because, you know, I don't want people to get the idea that I'm just super negative about dungeons, because I love M+, and I love this season, and I think there's a lot of great things about the season, but this dungeon is a tragedy. But I will go through it and discuss it regardless. This first pull, really not much to worry about. Just, you know, in this entire first area, really, the only thing to worry about is anytime that there would be an overlap with AoEs. There's only 2 mobs that do AoEs. There's the Enforcer, which does the Bellow, and then there is the Iron Raider, which does the Iron Hook. So you just need to look out for any time that an Iron Hook is happening close to a Bellow, and make sure that you either have a DR if that's happening, or you have a big healer CD to top people in between those AoE damage events. But outside of that, really not much to talk about this entire first area. It's just getting kicks and making sure your tank doesn't die, because there's a lot of nasty tank debuffs here, especially ones that reduce their haste. Just very silly mechanics. And then the, you know, obviously frustrating grip in plus the Iron Hook plus the Shattering Bellow happening at the same time.
Yeah, the combo is annoying.
Yeah.
So outside of that combo, I want to ask you about this pull. So I know this was what people did in BFA. And this particular mob, not the Toothbreaker, there's this one that absolutely decimates the tank, this Singing Steel. Like, is this pack still playable? Like, how do you think about this pack over here?
So it's actually not just the tank. The Singing Steel can actually target anyone, and they will just teleport behind someone randomly and just hit them for a huge amount of damage. It's called Iron Ambush, and it hits very, very, very hard. It's actually two different abilities. Singing Steel is the tank debuff, but Iron Ambush is the one that goes on non-tanks. And if you have too many of those in one pull, they can just Iron Ambush the same target and they'll just get deleted. So that's why a lot of people are avoiding pulling those at the same time. It's less about tank survivability and more about group survivability, although it is very dangerous for the tank as well. Like I said, just, the main thing to look out for here is making sure you don't pull too many of those mobs at once and watching your tank, because your tank is going to get shredded in this entire first area.
Right. And my next question is something that I know it's basic, but I'm going to ask it anyway, because I've seen so many keys being bricked on this particular patrol over here. So because these dudes, they don't move. Like the bombers, they just stand there, right? So I know a lot of people like to do this where they pull these things and they try and line of sight here, but somehow like the bombers are very janky. They stand here, they proxy aggro the patrol. Any advice here? Is it just an invis skip here? Like, what do you think about this area over here?
I generally just wait for the patrol to walk away, and then pull the 3-pack and just kill it before the patrol comes back. But it can be, it really just depends. The patrol's pretty slow, so you have a decent amount of time. But if you have a bad patrol timing, Invispot's not a bad idea. Trying to pull that pack a little bit to your left. If you have any type of displacement, most groups have, a grip or a knock or something that they can do to get that bomber to move. And it'll be okay. But yeah, for those groups that don't, it's definitely sketchy, and doing that patrol really sucks. Again, just not very well designed and is just gonna kind of suck. Do what you can to not pull that patrol, because that patrol does absolutely blow.
Speaking about things that break Siege of Boralus, I think the next pack here, these ones, they are very close to the boss. I've seen so many people kind of just tag in the boss by accident. Other than tagging the mobs and tanking them further away from the boss. Any advice?
Nope, that's pretty much it. Yep. Just tag them and pull them away from the boss as best you can. Right. It's the same thing that I was talking about in Dawnbreaker, where there are certain classes that just have hero abilities. For example, Frost Mage. If you're playing with a Frost Mage in here, you literally have to pull those packs all the way back to where you have that 3-pack patrol, all the way behind there, and LOS them all the way back there, or else the mage will just passively pull the boss, and there is nothing that they can do about it. It's just horribly designed, very frustrating. Yeah, not much good to say about this area.
Yeah, you have just outlined like one of the reasons why I think people hate Siege of Boralus back in the days. Anyway, we have the boss. It's just an execution fight. I think they've changed a few things. The cleavers are no longer CCable. You can't stop the cleave anymore. But other than that, like, any particular advice you give on this boss?
Definitely look for the Iron Hook. That's the big thing as both positionally and as a healer. That's the big AoE. The ads are going to do a lot of single target damage via their shoots and stuff. So if you can stun them, or just watch for the people that they're shooting, that's really going to be the only overlap that would be scary. Not very dangerous from a healer perspective, as long as everybody's doing the mechanics right. So, and the mechanics are just key to this fight. You got to make sure that you're kiting it correctly into the bombs, and that you're soaking a bomb in case it's going to go off before the boss can reach it. If you're doing that, fight should be relatively not too painful, but it is also just like a heavy dodge fight. And there's a lot of awkward bugs that can happen in this fight with the boss walking over a bomb but not actually triggering it. And I don't know. It can be a very frustrating fight mechanically. But HPS-wise, not really too much to worry about throughput-wise from a healer.
Fair enough. Okay, then we have the next area. I don't think there's a lot of difficult mechanics. You kick the commander, you kick the wave shaper. Those are the important ones. The curse blades, I've seen them murder people because like it stacks up on the tank and it just, you get one shot. So I just decurse. We can no longer abuse the spotter, so I don't think we need to talk about that. And then yeah, that's pretty much most of the mobs here. Anything you'd like to cover that I missed on all these mobs for the second boss?
Nope. Just watch for the, as a healer, just watch for the player that's targeted by the Azurite charge.
Fair enough. And then we have the second boss, and obviously they added some new mechanics. They added like the ricochet where it's unavoidable AoE damage. Anything that you think about as a healer that's different from BFA here?
Not really. The big thing is just the fiery ricochet. They just added a big visual to clear the deck, thank God. So that's super nice. You shouldn't have to worry about the frontal just randomly killing people because they don't notice which way the boss turned anymore. There was still a bug where it turned at the last second of clear the deck cast and just killed the group. Hopefully they fixed that when they added the visual. I haven't seen it since, but we'll have to look out for that. Gut shot is the big thing that you need to worry about if it goes off. As long as you always have your AoE healing prepped for each fiery ricochet cast, there's not much to do as a healer, just that. But if a gut shot ever goes off on someone, put a big external on them because that ability hits extremely hard. That should be mitigated. That should not ever actually go out because it only goes off if there's no, if the tank's not in melee. However, the boss is super buggy, especially when jumping from the ship. I wish they'd just add like a 3-second grace period, but currently they have not. So you just got to be very careful of if a gut shot ever goes off, make sure you have some big single target healing or big external for the player that gets it.
Yeah, good call out because I've seen the gut shot the boss do gut shot
Don't say it,
mid-air, and this is another reason why this dungeon is so frustrating. She does it sometimes, she doesn't do it, other times. So no idea what's going on there. So Blizzard, please look at this. After the boss, we kind of have like these destroyers and the banana area before the third boss. The demolisher they changed, unavoidable AoE on the crushing slam. There's unavoidable damage now. As a healer, I guess you would prefer if your tank don't chain demolishers together, I assume. Any other callouts on all these mobs over here?
Not particularly. The big thing is just making sure you get interrupts on choking waters. That's the one that's going to disrupt your group's safety the most. Just because it silences somebody for 6 seconds and it's often the healer. I'm pretty sure it exclusively casts on the healer. I could be wrong about that though. Maybe not. But definitely that's the big task to look out for, making sure you get kicks on. Water bolts can be dangerous if they're synced up with the AoE slam from the giant. The slam did just get nerfed though, so it's not that bad. Just make sure you have AoE prepped for each slam cast, and that's it. This area is pretty straightforward. And then just dodge the 586,000 bananas that get thrown down every cast.
Fair enough. And then you kind of clear the spotter, the snipers, and I love to ask you about this area because I feel like coming to this area, it's kind of deceiving. You think that you have a lot of time, but going through all these packs kind of takes time. And I don't know whether it's right to chain them together. Obviously, you have a raider and commander guarding the entrance, and then you have all these packs. How do you think about grouping them together, all these mobs over here?
So you definitely don't want to pull a bunch of them together. Typically, what most groups have done that I've seen is you pull the 2-pack first, you focus down the commander, and then you pull the raider into the next, the 4-pack right above you.
Right.
And yeah, so that would typically be how you do it. You don't want to pull all 3 of them at the same, all 3 of those mini boss things, the raider and the commander and the other commander all at the same time. You want to make sure you kill the first commander off first, or you're going to have a bad time with overlaps. So be very careful of that. This area is super dangerous for your tanks because they get a stacking poison debuff. Make sure you're dispelling that as much as you can. Try to avoid pulling. So this one's a little bit tough because it depends on if you're in a coordinated group or a pug group. In a pug group, it can be very scary to leave that G40 up. But ideally, in a push group, you will not want to pull that G40 group because it's very inefficient on count, and it's very dangerous when you have the shoots constantly coming out, plus from the snipers, and then you also have the tank debuff and the giant AoE. That's a very scary pull because of the snipers. So, and you don't even have to pull them because as long as you hug the fountain reasonably close, you have a fair amount of leeway in terms of not face pulling them while dodging the waves from this boss. But in general, you wouldn't want to play on that half of the room except while dodging. You would only want to play on the other half of the room. So that's what I recommend for this area, is just make a route that avoids pulling that last pack. unless you're in a pug and you feel like you can't really trust people to not face pull that, because obviously that'd be a terrible way to rip the key. So
fair advice. And then you spoke a bit about the boss. Anything we need to take note of the boss? They changed it such that like there's 2 waves spawning. You hug the fountain, you dodge it. Is there any like overlaps where you kind of need to pay special attention to?
nope, it's just dodge the waves. That's it, and then just make sure you have the heal for breakwater, and that's it.
Right, and we saved the best or maybe the worst for the last, which is basically like Viggoth. And I think everyone hates this boss because, and even they nerfed it, the tentacles, they used to do a knockback, but still a lot of damage going out. I'll leave it to you. How do I even start to cover this boss? What do we do here?
So the idea here is spell timings, like spell queuing. Right. The thing you want to look out for, obviously, same thing I've been talking about in all these other dungeons, overlaps. So the 2 damage events of the fight are the slam from the tentacle, which now does not knock back, which is very nice, but it still does damage. So you want to look out for the slam from the tentacle that goes out at the same time as debuffs going out. Now this can be controlled with spell queuing as to which, like when you decide to shoot and spawn the tentacles on the next platform. So the 2nd and 3rd platforms can be controlled. I haven't actually looked into the exact timing that you want to push them at ideally so you don't get any overlaps, but I do know that it exists, and I will find it at some point. And then I'll try to comment on the video when I figure that out. But I haven't looked into that much. On the first platform, however, you cannot control it because it's obviously just when the boss spawns and it starts with its standard spell queuing. So you want to make sure that you watch for the 2nd slam. The 2nd set of debuffs with the 2nd slam are going to happen at the exact same time on that first platform. That's the overlap. You want to make sure that everybody has either a raid cooldown or a defensive going into that, because people will just get randomly one-shot by that 2nd set of debuffs on the fight. So yeah, watch out for that. And it actually might be the 3rd slam. It's the 2nd set of debuffs. I know that. I don't remember which number slam it is, but definitely the 2nd set of debuffs. So watch for that. Make sure you're just watching for overlaps. And healers, you need to commit to dispelling. Basically, what I always tell people is pre-spread and don't worry about who's stacked on who. If people are stacked when you dispel, that's on them. That's not on you. The first dispel of Putrid Waters has to happen immediately. Do not second guess yourself. Look for the 2 people being targeted and immediately dispel one of them so you can just focus all your healing onto the other. If you wait too long to dispel, you're going to be trying to heal 2 people. It's going to be a disaster. You want to be very, very active, and on top of that, especially because then you can get your 2nd dispel out much earlier on in the taking debuff. So it's just much less healing throughput required if you're quick with the dispels. And then the last thing is that you can actually see who the Putrid Waters are going on. Now you can't see that on frames at all. There's no way to track that. However, the boss visuals has an animation of the little blobs flying at you. So if you're spread from the group, you can actually see where those orbs are aiming, and you can tell, okay, one of those orbs is going into melee, one of them is going out of range. You can see visually who those are going to go on, so you can actually prep your dispel before it even happens. And as a player yourself, you can actually use your defensives proactively if you see that it's going on you, or like pre-immunities, stuff like that. So definitely a good little trick there is to look for the animations coming from the boss when Putrid Waters comes out.
Yeah, I love the tip about being decisive on the first dispel, because I think like in pucks, people tend to blame a healer like when you dispel, you knock someone off, like, hey, like, why did you dispel me there? But I love the tip there because, you have no time for hesitation right there. So love the kind of tips over there on Siege of Boralus. Overall, I would say pretty much, I don't like this dungeon either, so I think you have, pretty much spoken what it's on everyone's mind. So hopefully they kind of look into some of the bugs here. And then we finally get to the final dungeon, which is Necrotic Wake. And this is a returning dungeon from Shadowlands. Weapons have been nerfed. And I think, they changed count such that the gatekeepers are something that you probably need to pull now. How do you think about the mobs and in terms of like chaining the groups of pulls over here?
I think that most of these mobs are not too dangerous. The gatekeepers are the ones that are really dangerous. You want to make sure that you have a lot of healing prepped for each Wrath of Zolramos. I don't know. Zolramos? I don't know how you pronounce that. But that's going to be the big AoE that happens. The Clinging Darkness, don't really worry about that. It doesn't really do much. Eventually, you want to dispel it if it stacks too high. But it barely... I don't even know if it scales with key level. It barely does any damage. So Wrath of Zoremus is what you really want to make sure that you have your healing prep for. And it happens pretty close to each other. The first 2 casts happen within like 15 seconds of each other. So as soon as the first one finishes, you need to make sure you're topping your group and then prepping for the next one immediately. Very dangerous mob, but in general, once you're used to it, not too bad. Just make sure that you get kicks. This whole first area is just about getting kicks and watching for the flesh crafters casting throw flesh. Throw flesh is like the unavoidable single target hit that they do. It's the other mob, the harvester. Yeah, that one.
Yeah.
Drain fluids, obviously you need a kick for, but the throw flesh is unavoidable and does pretty significant single target damage. So you got to watch out for that. Try and stun it during the wrath if you happen to pull one in with one of those mini bosses. But yeah, in general, not too much to talk about in this area, healing wise, outside of just making sure you have that AoE prepped and watching for those single target throw flushes.
Right. First boss, I'd like to ask you, I've been, kind of seeing this happen in high keys. Like, Heaving Wretch just one-shots people at a certain key level. Like, is there a play around this, or is it just like pop defensives?
There is not really a play around this unless you have a warrior. So if you have a warrior tank, they can intercept everyone, and it's incredibly free. But if you're not playing with a prot warrior, then yeah, it's just pop big defensives. And when I mean big, I mean very big. This ability hits insanely hard. And you need to make sure as a healer, you're dispelling it as soon as it goes out, assuming that you have a disease cleanse. If you don't have a disease cleanse, just make sure you're on top of spot healing them until it's gone. Not too much to talk about from a healing perspective. This is a very low healing fight. It's all just about making sure that you use defensives and aim the Heaving Wretch correctly. Right,
fair enough. After the first boss, you kind of head up the stairs, and I think most of these mobs here are pretty simple. We don't need to cover them. I think most people skip Nezuda, but for the people who accidentally pull, or on high keys, they purposely pull Nezuda, I don't know, for some weird routing. Is there anything they need to pay attention to on Nezuda?
Well, people are pulling it more now because they increase the mob count so much that you are not able to skip so many things that you used to be able to skip. The big thing to look out for this on this mini boss is just the AoE that it does. Outside of that, it's all just getting kicks. There's just 1,000 kicks that go out from all the casters in this pack. Extremely dangerous pull. Highly suggest using one of the silence orbs on this pack. But outside of that, there's really not too much that's in your control as a healer. It's all just about kicks and stops on the casters, making sure your tank lives, the healing absorbs from the necrotic bolts, and then popping your group after each AoE cast.
Cool, sounds good. You head up the stairs, and there's a bunch of necromancers. I would just say, like, kick the frost volleys.
Well, the big thing I can say about that, outside of kicking the frost volleys, is whenever the mini boss does its summon, its animate dead. So you can actually use CC on this necromancer, and you want to stun or disrupt it when it starts casting that. If you do that, it'll stop it from spawning the crossbow and a second mage. It'll only spawn one of the tank mobs if you're quick enough, and that will infinitely reduce the difficulty of this pull. But definitely watch for getting a stop on the animate dead.
Massive tip. That's helpful. So I think the other mobs here, pretty much everyone knows how to deal with them. This mob is new. I don't think it's dangerous. Just get out the AoE. Anything to add here on this new mob that everyone pulls now?
I don't think so. It's just dodge and get out of melee. That's it.
Fair enough. This second boss, not as hard as the third, I think, but it's kind of messy. I think when the ads spawn, a lot of people have troubles with like grouping ads and volleys going off. Any advice here?
Well, I highly suggest CCing the mages whenever they spawn, if you can. At least one of them. If you can CC one of them, and every group should have enough CC that you can CC at least one of them. If you can CC one of them, your life's going to be infinitely easier. You don't even have to worry about killing it. If it's CC'd, when the boss casts its final harvest, the CC'd mob will just get sucked in and it will not give anyone a debuff. It'll be as if it died. So CCing one of the mages, very, very, very good idea. That way you only have to worry about kicking one of the frostbolt volleys, and then you can send the rest of the kicks into boss.
Right. Okay, good stuff. Then we go up to the Necropolis, and I think most of these mobs here, it's just about how you group them. Is there any particular call outs on any mobs that's dangerous? maybe I'm biased because we've done this in previous expansions, but is there anything that's like dangerous? Because I feel it's pretty.
So it's only two things. One is the corpse collectors do the AOE that needs to be kicked, and yeah, the gore splat, and then obviously drain fluids also needs to get kicked. Those two things. Outside of that, the only other thing as a healer that you really need to worry about is Rotfest. What's his name?
This guy.
Rot Spew. That's it.
Yeah.
Yes. So Rot Spew is a very, very dangerous mob, especially on higher keys. Basically, it does a consistent pulsing AoE around melee, and it does a single target ability called Disease or Spew Disease that does an absolutely huge amount of damage up front. So especially if you're a melee DPS and you're not topped when that's going out, you need a huge defensive. You need to be ready if that's ever targeting you. So make sure as a healer, you're topping the group, and make sure that you're always watching for the person targeted by Spew Disease because they're going to get hit very, very hard.
Right, that's good advice. And then we have the very terrifying third boss that has been nerfed. Let's talk about what should we do on this fight other than landing hooks. But once you land the hook, kind of walk us through like how should we do with this fight?
There's two things that make this fight dangerous. One is the bleeds that get put out by the boss actually do a fair amount of damage. Stitch Needle. Those can be dwarfed, immuned, cauterized. You should be using those actively as much as you can to help your healer. Basically, that's just a dot, and this fight's a bunch of rot damage anyways, so just press your heals. As for when the A-bomb is down, the way that the A-bomb actually works damage-wise is it's a ramping AoE that continues to ramp throughout the fight. So, and a lot of people don't realize that it actually does ramp up as the fight lasts longer. So the sooner that you kill the Stitch Flesh creation, the easier the boss is going to be. Basically, as soon as that A-bomb dies, that's it. There's no more AoE damage at all. So if you're killing the Stitch Flesh creations every time, it's going to be less efficient for the boss, but it's going to be infinitely more safe for your group. And it's going to make your healer's life very easy. So there's two strats with this boss. Either one, you lust with every single weapon that you have. You save all of your spears, and you lust and burn the ever-living heck out of the boss, and just throw everything you have at it up front. That's one strat, and it does work great, especially in push groups. But in pugs, that can be a little bit sketchy, especially if somebody misses a spear, or somebody doesn't have their cooldowns correct, or X, Y, or Z, name 1,000 reasons. Whatever happens, something goes wrong. You got to watch for, you got to think about that and whether or not you really want to risk that in a pug setting. Or if you just want to do the safe strat if you have a lot of time and just focus kill the Stitch Flesh creation every single time, and eventually the boss will die. But it'll be a very easy, safe fight to do. So it's kind of just which way you want to play the fight. Do you want to play it safe, or do you just want to risk it all for a very fast?
Good explanation, I think, on the trade-offs and the risk profile there. So I love the explanation. We have the final boss, moving on from the third boss, and that's basically the Rhinebinder, right? And I think on high keys, people kind of struggle with the shield phase, where the boss puts up a shield, does a lot more damage. How do you kind of think about this boss from a healer's perspective?
Well, the only thing to worry about this boss is Frozen Binds, making sure you get your Dispel, and then the Icebound Aegis, like you said, the shield, the AoE damage from that. But that's it. There's pretty much zero other things to worry about. The tank damage can be relatively high in this fight, so you do have to watch out for that. The Icy Shard can hit very hard. It just depends on which tank you're running with and their skill level, but definitely something to at least keep your eye on. But yeah, the Icebound Aegis damage is really not that bad. The only time it can get bad is if a bunch of people are down, killing their ads. So if you have one or two people that are still working on their ads in the below phase, and that means upstairs, the shield is going to break very slowly. And the slower the shield breaks, the more the Icebound Aegis' damage is going to stack up. So it gets increasingly harder and harder and harder to heal. So make sure that you're saving any like major healing cooldowns you have for a phase where you have somebody down that otherwise would be a really big, damage dealer for the shield phase. In case that shield phase ends up stacking up. But otherwise, not too much to talk about. Just AoE heal when the shield's up, and otherwise just have fun DPSing.
Right. And with that, pretty much we covered everything in Season 1. It's way beyond the time I usually want to hold you back for Ellesmere. So firstly, I apologize for holding you back. I know you're streaming.
I'm so sorry. 3 hour.
No. I really
Podcast.
enjoy.
What are we
all
gonna
the
do on
insights.
YouTube?
Don't worry, we're just gonna send this whole thing as like a 2.5-hour long lecture, and on your side, I know you're uploading the entire VOD, so I would definitely get more people to kind of check out the entire VOD. I know you have some thoughts after the podcast episode and whatnot as well, so I think it'll be a great kind of study session for people, and I think everyone will appreciate the insights. Just like your first episode, I think there are a lot of very applicable, tangible stuff people didn't think about. I've actually learned a lot of new tech from just you walking through a lot of these pools. And I think your years of experience doing like MDIs and TGPs really show, especially on the old dungeons. Like, there's a lot of tech that I actually didn't know, so I appreciate that. But yeah, I apologize for taking more than usual of your time. Thank you so much. And
Of course.
yeah, I will let you go here.
All right.
And you know, we've got some serious editing to do with such a long episode, but it's gonna be great. I think people will love it. I just want to say thank you again. And yeah, you know, I will get you back. There's a lot more stuff I want to talk to you about. Like, I didn't even cover some of the more spicy stuff. Like, I want to know your take on comms, like Volkers and stuff like that. But we'll leave that maybe to the later half of the season. We'll definitely love to have you back. But
well, thank you so much for having me, Quazii. I had a wonderful time. You're an incredible interviewer, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.